The storm arrived without warning, as autumn storms often do in the Carpathian Mountains. Rain lashed against the ancient stones of Castle Dracula with a fury that seemed almost personal, as if the heavens themselves sought to punish the fortress for the sins committed within its walls. Lightning split the sky in jagged white lines, illuminating the twisted peaks and dark forests that surrounded the castle like a crown of thorns. Thunder rolled across the valleys, echoing through abandoned villages where no living soul dared to dwell after sunset. Inside the castle, Count Dracula stood motionless before the great window of his study, watching the tempest with eyes that had witnessed 300 years of such storms. He did not flinch when lightning struck close enough to shake the foundations. He did not blink when thunder crashed like the wrath of God. He simply stood, a statue carved from shadow and sorrow, his pale hands clasped behind his back, his dark coat hanging from his tall frame like the wings of some predatory bird at rest. The room around him was a museum of loss. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather bindings cracked and faded, their pages filled with knowledge that no longer held meaning for him. Maps of forgotten kingdoms hung beside tapestries depicting hunts and battles from ages past. A fire burned low in the massive stone fireplace, casting flickering shadows that danced across portraits of men and women long dead, their painted eyes seeming to follow him with silent accusation. But Dracula paid them no mind. His attention was fixed on the storm, though his thoughts were centuries away. 300 years, 300 years since he had held her in his arms, as life fled from her body. 300 years since Elena had looked up at him with those gentle brown eyes and smiled, even as death claimed her. 300 years since she had whispered her final words, a promise that had sustained him through the endless nights that followed. "I will return to you. Wait for me. I will find my way back." He had waited. God help him. He had waited. While empires rose and fell, while wars ravaged the lands below, while generations of humans were born and died in the span of a single breath of his immortal existence, he had waited. He had stopped hunting. He had stopped feeding on the innocent. He had locked himself away in this crumbling fortress, sustained by the blood of animals and the occasional bandit, foolish enough to approach his gates. He had become a ghost in his own castle, haunting the corridors where he and Elena had once walked together during those brief, precious weeks before her death. The memory of her death never faded. It played in his mind with perfect clarity, as vivid as the moment it happened. The fever that had taken her so quickly, the helplessness he had felt watching her grow weaker each day, the terrible choice he had faced. Let her die and honor her humanity, or turn her and damn her soul to eternal darkness. She had begged him not to transform her. She had made him promise to let her go. And he had kept that promise, though it had torn something essential from his being, something he suspected he would never recover. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape beyond the window, and for a moment, Dracula thought he saw a figure on the road below. He leaned forward slightly, his preternatural vision piercing the rain and darkness. Nothing, just the storm and the empty road. He stepped back, disgusted with himself. How many times had he imagined her return? How many times had he seen her face in every dark-haired woman who passed near his domain? How many times had hope risen in his chest like a poisonous flower, only to wither when reality asserted itself? He turned from the window and walked to his desk, where a single candle burned beside an open journal. The journal was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with his careful script. He had begun writing it the night Elena died, a record of his grief and his waiting. The early entries were anguished, raw with pain and rage at the unfairness of existence. The later entries grew colder, more distant, as the years stretched into decades and the decades into centuries. The most recent entries were sparse, mere notations of dates and empty observations about the passing of time. He picked up the quill and dipped it in ink, preparing to make another meaningless entry, when he heard it. A sound so faint that even his enhanced hearing almost missed it beneath the roar of the storm. A knock at the front gate. Dracula froze, the quill hovering above the page. No one knocked at his gate, not anymore. The villagers in the valleys below told stories about this castle, stories passed down through generations, stories that kept travelers far away. The few hunters or adventurers who had approached over the years had done so with weapons drawn and crosses held high, not with polite knocking. And yet there it was again, clearer this time. 3 distinct knocks, patient and unhurried, as if the person on the other side had all the time in the world and was certain of receiving an answer. He set down the quill and moved toward the door of his study, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. As he descended the grand staircase to the main hall, he felt something he had not experienced in decades: curiosity. Who would knock at his door in the middle of such a storm? What kind of fool or madman would seek shelter in Castle Dracula? The main hall was vast and empty, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Suits of armor stood like silent sentinels along the walls, and a massive chandelier hung overhead, its candles long since burned away. The front doors were enormous things of oak and iron, built to withstand siege and storm. Dracula approached them slowly, his hand reaching for the iron bolt that held them closed. He paused. Some instinct, some whisper of warning or presentiment, made him hesitate. Beyond these doors was a stranger, someone who had somehow found their way through the storm to his cursed threshold. Opening those doors would break the isolation he had maintained for so long. Opening those doors would invite the world back into his existence, with all the complications and pain that implied. The knock came again, and this time it was followed by a voice. A woman's voice, clear and strong despite the storm. "Please, is anyone there? I need shelter. I mean no harm." A woman, alone, in this storm, at his gates. Every rational part of Dracula's mind told him to turn away, to return to his study, and let the storm claim whoever was foolish enough to approach Castle Dracula. But something deeper, something he thought had died with Elena, would not let him walk away. He drew back the bolt and pulled open one of the great doors. Rain and wind rushed into the hall, bringing with them the scent of wet earth and pine. And there, standing in the courtyard beyond the threshold, illuminated by another flash of lightning, was a woman. She was soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face and neck, her simple traveling clothes clinging to her slender frame. She held a small bag in one hand and raised the other to shield her eyes from the rain as she looked up at him. And then she smiled. It was not a smile of fear or uncertainty. It was not the nervous smile of someone confronting a stranger in a dark and forbidding place. It was a smile of genuine relief, warm and open, the smile of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for. And in that moment, as lightning flashed again and her face was illuminated in stark white light, Dracula felt his dead heart seize in his chest. She looked exactly like Elena, the same delicate features, the same gentle curve of her lips, the same large, expressive eyes, though he could not yet tell their color in the darkness, the same graceful bearing, even bedraggled and exhausted as she was. For a moment he could not speak, could not move, could not do anything but stare at this impossible apparition standing at his threshold. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice cutting through his paralysis. "I saw the lights of your castle from the road and hoped someone might offer shelter. The storm came so suddenly and I lost my way." She took a step forward, still smiling, apparently unaware of the effect she was having on him. "I promise I will not be any trouble. I only need a place to rest until morning, and then I will be on my way." Dracula found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Who are you?" The woman blinked, surprised by the question, and then her smile widened slightly. "My name is Mirela. I am a teacher from Bucharest, traveling to Brasov to take a position at a school there." She gestured at the storm behind her, though it seems the mountains had other plans for my journey. Mirela, not Elena. Of course not Elena. Elena had been dead for 300 years. This was simply a woman who bore a striking resemblance to her, nothing more. A coincidence, a cruel trick of fate. He should send her away. He should close the door and return to his solitude. He should not invite this complication into his existence. "Come inside," he heard himself say. "You will catch your death in this storm." Mirela's smile brightened with gratitude, and she hurried through the doorway. Dracula stepped back to let her pass, and as she moved into the light of the hall, he got his first clear look at her face. The resemblance was even more striking up close. The same high cheekbones, The same slightly pointed chin, the same small scar above her left eyebrow. A detail he had nearly forgotten about Elena, until this moment brought it rushing back. But her eyes were different. Elena's eyes had been brown, soft, and warm as summer earth. Mirela's eyes were green, a deep emerald green that caught the candlelight and seemed to glow with their own inner fire. It was a small difference, but it was enough to remind him that this was not Elena, could not be Elena. "This is very kind of you," Mirela said, setting down her bag and wringing water from her hair. "I was beginning to think I would have to shelter under a tree and take my chances with the lightning." She looked around the hall with frank curiosity, taking in the suits of armor, the tapestries, the massive chandelier. "This is quite a place. Do you live here alone?" "I do," Dracula said. He closed the door, shutting out the storm, and turned to face her. The hall suddenly felt smaller with another living presence in it, the silence more pronounced. What should he do now? He had not entertained a guest in decades. He had no food to offer her, no proper accommodations prepared. He was unpracticed at the basic courtesies of hospitality. Mirela did not seem troubled by his reticence. She smiled at him again, that same warm, open smile, and held out her hand. "I do not believe I caught your name, sir." He looked at her extended hand for a long moment. If he took it, if he touched her, he would be crossing some invisible threshold, admitting this strange woman into his existence in a way that would be difficult to reverse. But to refuse would be churlish, and despite everything he had become, despite the monster that lurked beneath his civilized exterior, he had been raised as a nobleman. Some habits died harder than others. He took her hand. Her skin was cold from the rain, but her grip was firm and confident. "My name is Dragos," he said, using the name he had adopted in his rare interactions with the modern world. "This is my home." Mirela's eyes widened slightly. "Dragos? What a strong name. It suits this place." She released his hand and looked around the hall again, her expression thoughtful. "How long have you lived here?" "A long time," he said carefully. "My family has held this castle for many generations." "It must be lonely," Mirela said softly, and there was something in her tone, some note of understanding or sympathy that made him look at her sharply. "Living in such a large place all by yourself. Do you never have visitors?" "No," he said. "People do not often venture this far into the mountains, and when they do, they rarely stop here. There are stories about this castle, superstitions. Most travelers prefer to pass by quickly." "But not you," Mirela said, and now she was looking directly at him, those green eyes searching his face with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "You are not afraid of the stories." "There is nothing to fear in this place," he said, and even as the words left his mouth, he recognized them for the lie they were. He was the thing to fear. He was the monster the stories warned about. But Mirela did not need to know that. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, if he could arrange to have her gone by morning. "I am glad to hear it," Mirela said, "though I confess I am not easily frightened. I have traveled many roads and seen many strange things. A castle in the mountains, however imposing, is merely a building." She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered slightly. "Though a building with a fire would be most welcome at the moment, if you could spare one." "Of course," Dracula said. He gestured toward the corridor that led to the main sitting room. "This way. I will find you some dry clothes and something warm to drink." As he led her through the castle, he was acutely aware of her presence behind him, the soft sound of her wet shoes on the stone floor, the faint rustle of her clothing. His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman really? What was she doing on this road, in this storm, at this precise moment? Was it truly just coincidence that she looked so much like Elena? Or was something else at work here, some force or design beyond his understanding? The sitting room was warmer than the hall, with a fire still burning in the hearth. Dracula added more wood to the flames, while Mirela moved to stand near the heat, holding her hands out toward the fire. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the graceful way she moved, the natural elegance of her posture. Everything about her reminded him of Elena, and yet everything was also subtly different. It was like looking at a painting of a beloved face done by a different artist, recognizable, but not quite the same. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs near the fire. I will find you something dry to wear." "You are very kind," Mirela said, settling into the chair with a sigh of relief. "I feel as though I have been traveling for days, though it has only been since this morning." "Where did you say you were going?" Dracula asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Brasov?" "Yes," Mirela said. "I have been offered a position teaching literature at a girls' school there. It is a good opportunity, a chance to leave Bucharest and start fresh." She smiled, but there was something sad in the expression, some shadow that passed across her face. "Sometimes we need to leave the past behind and begin again, do we not?" "Sometimes," Dracula agreed quietly, "though the past has a way of following us, no matter how far we run." Mirela looked at him sharply, and for a moment he thought he saw recognition in her eyes, as if his words had touched something deep within her. But then the moment passed, and she was smiling again, polite and distant. "Perhaps, but we must try nonetheless." He left her by the fire and went to find clothes. In a guest room that had not been opened in decades, he found a wardrobe still containing garments from a bygone era. They would be old-fashioned by modern standards, but they were clean and dry. He selected a simple dress of dark blue wool and a shawl, along with undergarments and stockings. As he gathered them, he found himself wondering what he was doing. Why was he going to such trouble for this stranger? Why had he not simply given her a blanket and directed her to a room where she could sleep until morning? "Because she looks like Elena," a voice whispered in his mind. "Because you cannot help yourself. Because in 300 years you have not let go of the hope that she would return to you." He returned to the sitting room and found Mirela exactly where he had left her, staring into the flames with a distant expression. She looked up when he entered, and her smile returned, bright and warm. "You found something." "Thank you." "There is a room down the hall where you can change," he said, handing her the clothes. "Take your time, I will prepare some tea." "Tea would be wonderful," Mirela said. She took the clothes and stood, then paused, looking at him with those searching green eyes. "You are a strange man, Dragos. Most people would have turned me away, but you have welcomed me without question." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. He could not tell her the truth, could not explain the 3 centuries of loneliness and longing that had driven him to open his door. Instead, he said simply, "Because it is the right thing to do. No one deserves to be left out in such a storm." Mirela studied him for another moment, and then nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said again, and there was something in her tone that suggested she understood more than he had said. "I am grateful for your kindness." She left the room, and Dracula stood alone by the fire, his mind churning. This was dangerous, this was foolish. He should send her away as soon as the storm passed. He should put as much distance between himself and this woman as possible. Nothing good could come from allowing her to stay, from allowing himself to hope that she might be more than she appeared. But even as he thought these things, he knew he would not do them. He would let her stay, he would watch her, study her, search for any sign that she was indeed Elena returned to him as promised, and if she was not, if she was simply an ordinary woman who happened to resemble his lost love, then he would let her go in the morning and return to his solitude, his waiting, his endless vigil. The storm continued to rage outside, thunder shaking the ancient stones, rain drumming against the windows. But inside the castle, for the first time in 300 years, Count Dracula did not feel quite so alone. And that terrified him more than any storm ever could. When Mirela returned to the sitting room wearing the borrowed dress, she looked even more like Elena. The blue wool brought out the color of her eyes and highlighted the graceful lines of her neck and shoulders. Her dark hair, now partially dry, fell in soft waves around her face. She moved with the same natural elegance Elena had possessed, unconscious of her own beauty, focused instead on the simple pleasure of being warm and dry. "Thank you again," she said, settling back into the chair by the fire. "These are beautiful clothes, though quite old-fashioned. They must be family heirlooms." "Something like that," Dracula murmured. He handed her a cup of tea he had prepared, careful not to let their fingers touch. The tea was simple, just herbs and hot water, but Mirela accepted it gratefully and sipped with obvious appreciation. "This is perfect," she said. "You have been very kind to a stranger, Dragos. I hope I have not imposed too much." "Not at all," he said, though the words felt hollow. She had imposed in ways she could not begin to understand, had disrupted the careful equilibrium of his existence simply by existing. But he could hardly tell her that. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the storm rage beyond the walls. Dracula found himself stealing glances at her, cataloguing every similarity and difference between her and Elena. The way she held her cup with both hands, just as Elena had. The way she tilted her head slightly when thinking, just as Elena had. But also the differences, the green eyes instead of brown, the slightly different cadence of her speech, the confidence in her bearing that Elena, a simple peasant girl, had never possessed. "May I ask you something?" Mirela said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Of course," Dracula said, though he tensed, wondering what she would ask. "Why do you live here alone in such a large castle so far from everything? It seems a lonely existence for someone who appears to be a gentleman of means." "It is complicated," Dracula said carefully. "This castle has been in my family for many generations, and I am the last of my line. I remain here out of duty, out of obligation to those who came before me." "But what about your own life?" Mirela asked gently. "What about companionship, friendship, love? Surely those things matter more than obligation to the dead." Her words struck him like a physical blow. If only she knew how much those things mattered, how much he had sacrificed for love, how deeply he mourned its loss. "Perhaps you are right," he said quietly. "But sometimes the dead have claims on us that the living cannot understand. Sometimes we are bound by promises we cannot break, no matter how much we might wish to." Mirela looked at him with those penetrating green eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him, past the civilized facade to the monster beneath. "What kind of promise could bind someone so completely?" she asked. "The kind made to someone you loved more than your own existence," Dracula said, before he could stop himself. "The kind that becomes the only thing sustaining you when everything else is lost." The room fell silent again, but now the silence was charged with something heavier, something more meaningful. Mirela set down her cup and leaned forward slightly, her expression serious. "You speak of loss," she said softly. "Have you lost someone you loved?" "Yes," Dracula said simply. "A long time ago." "And you have never moved past it," Mirela said. "It was not a question but a statement. You remain here in this castle waiting." "For what?" "For something that will never come," he said, and the bitterness in his voice surprised even him. "For a promise to be fulfilled that cannot be fulfilled, for hope to justify itself when all reason says it should have died long ago." Mirela was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. Then she said very gently, "Perhaps the one you lost would not want you to live this way. Perhaps she would want you to find peace, to find happiness again." "Perhaps," Dracula said. "But peace and happiness are not so easily found when you have seen what I have seen, lived as I have lived. Some losses leave scars too deep to heal." "I understand," Mirela said, and there was something in her voice that made him look at her sharply. She met his gaze steadily. "I have known loss, too. Different from yours, perhaps, but loss nonetheless. And I have learned that the only way forward is to keep moving, to keep seeking, even when you do not know what you are seeking or why. What have you lost?" Dracula asked, genuinely curious now. Mirela smiled sadly. "My past, my memories, everything that came before 5 years ago is simply gone, as if I did not exist before then. I woke up in a hospital in Bucharest with no memory of who I was or how I came to be there. The doctors said it was amnesia, caused by some trauma they could not identify. They said the memories might return someday, or they might not. Since then I have been trying to build a new life, a new identity, but there is always this sense of something missing, something just out of reach." Dracula felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath him. No memories, no past. An existence that began only 5 years ago. Could it be? Could this woman actually be Elena, reborn and somehow finding her way back to him, but without the memories that would tell her who she truly was? He forced himself to remain calm, to keep his voice steady. "That must be very difficult," he said, "to not know your own history, your own origins." "It is," Mirela agreed, "but in some ways it is also liberating. I am not bound by the past because I have no past. I can be whoever I choose to be, create myself anew each day. She looked at him again with those unsettling green eyes. "Perhaps that is what you need as well, Dragos, to stop dwelling on who you were and what you lost, and start thinking about who you could become." "Perhaps," he said again, though he knew it was impossible. He could never escape what he was, what he had become the night he accepted the dark gift of immortality. He was bound to his nature as surely as he was bound to his promise to Elena. They talked for a while longer, their conversation ranging across many topics. Mirela spoke of her work as a teacher, her love of literature, her plans for the future. Dracula found himself drawn in despite his caution, fascinated by the way her mind worked, the intelligence and wit behind her words. She was different from Elena in so many ways, more educated, more worldly, more confident, and yet the essence of her, the fundamental gentleness and compassion that shone through in every word and gesture, was unmistakably familiar. As the night wore on and the storm began to abate, Mirela's eyes grew heavy. She fought to stay awake, clearly not wanting to be rude to her host, but eventually exhaustion won. "I am sorry," she said, stifling a yawn. "It has been a very long day, and I fear I am poor company at the moment." "Not at all," Dracula said, rising from his chair. "You must rest. Let me show you to a guest room where you can sleep." He led her through the corridors to a room he had prepared while she was changing, a comfortable chamber with a large bed and windows that looked out over the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear sky scattered with stars. The moon hung low on the horizon, nearly full, bathing the landscape in silver light. "This is lovely," Mirela said, looking around the room with appreciation. "Thank you, Dragos, for everything. You have been more kind than I had any right to expect." "It was nothing," Dracula said, though they both knew it was not nothing. "Rest well. If you need anything during the night, I will be in my study down the hall." Mirela nodded, and then, impulsively, she stepped forward and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Good night," she said softly. "And thank you for reminding me that there is still kindness in the world." Before he could respond, she stepped back into the room and closed the door gently. Dracula stood in the corridor for a long moment, his hand raised to touch the place where her lips had brushed his skin. The simple gesture had stirred feelings he thought long dead, emotions he had buried beneath centuries of grief and isolation. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This was dangerous. This woman, whoever she was, whatever she might be, was dangerous to him in ways that had nothing to do with physical harm. She threatened the careful walls he had built around his heart, the emotional fortress that had kept him sane through 300 years of waiting. If he was not careful, if he let himself hope too much, believe too deeply, he would be destroyed when the truth revealed itself, whatever that truth might be. He returned to his study and stood once more before the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving everything sharp and clear in the pale light. Somewhere out there, life continued as it always had, humans living and dying, loving and losing, moving through their brief existences with no awareness of the immortal creature watching from his mountain fortress. And now, inside that fortress, a woman slept. A woman who looked like Elena, who spoke with wisdom beyond her apparent years, who had no memory of her past, who had somehow found her way to his door on this night of all nights. Coincidence? Fate? Divine intervention or demonic trickery? He did not know. But he would find out. He would watch Mirela, study her, search for any sign that she was more than she appeared. And if she truly was, Elena returned to him. If the impossible had somehow become possible, then he would face whatever consequences came with that miracle. He had waited 300 years. He could wait a few more days to learn the truth. Outside, the moon continued its ancient journey across the sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. Inside Castle Dracula, two souls stood on the threshold of a mystery that would test the very limits of love, faith, and the boundaries between life and death. The storm had passed, but a greater tempest was only beginning to gather, one that would shake the foundations of everything Count Dracula believed about destiny, redemption, and the promises we make to those we love. And somewhere in the darkness, watching and waiting with malevolent patience, other forces stirred. Forces that had their own designs on Castle Dracula and its inhabitants. Forces that would soon make their presence known, forcing both vampire and mortal to confront truths they had spent lifetimes trying to escape. The night wore on toward dawn, and in the guest room Mirela slept, dreaming dreams she would not remember upon waking. Dreams of castles and moonlight, of a man with eyes like winter frost and a voice like distant thunder. Dreams of promises and partings, of love that transcended death, of waiting that spanned centuries. Dreams that felt less like fantasies and more like memories trying desperately to resurface from the depths where they had been buried. But when morning came, as it always did, would those dreams fade back into the shadows? Or would they grow stronger, more insistent, forcing Mirela to confront the impossible truth of who she might really be? Only time would tell. And time, for Count Dracula, was the one thing he had in abundance. Dawn came slowly to the Carpathian Mountains, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. Count Dracula watched the sunrise from the shadows of his study, careful to remain out of direct light. The sun no longer burned him as it once had, not after centuries of slow adaptation and discipline, but it still weakened him, made him vulnerable in ways he preferred to avoid. He had spent the entire night standing at his window, unable to rest, unable to think of anything except the woman sleeping down the hall. Mirela. The name echoed in his mind like a prayer or a curse. He could not decide which. She had appeared so suddenly, so impossibly, looking like the answer to 300 years of waiting. But was she? Or was she simply a cruel coincidence? A woman whose resemblance to Elena was nothing more than a random alignment of features, meaningless and empty. The revelation about her amnesia had shaken him more than he cared to admit. 5 years ago she had awakened in a hospital with no memory of her past, no knowledge of who she had been before. 5 years was nothing in the span of eternity, barely a heartbeat in his long existence. Could Elena's soul have wandered the void for 3 centuries before finally finding a new vessel? Could the cosmos be so precise in its cruelty that it would return her to him but strip away all memory of what they had shared? He had read extensively about reincarnation over the years, studying the beliefs of various cultures and religions. The Hindus spoke of the cycle of death and rebirth, the soul transmigrating from one body to another. The Buddhists taught of karma and the eternal return. Even some Christian mystics had whispered of souls returning to complete unfinished business, to fulfill promises made in previous lives. But reading about such things and confronting the possibility in flesh and blood were 2 vastly different experiences. If Mirela truly was Elena reborn, what did that mean for him? For them? Would her memories return eventually, allowing her to remember their love and the promise she had made? Or would she remain forever ignorant of her past, living out this new life with no awareness of what had come before? And if that was the case, would it be right for him to tell her? To burden her with knowledge she might not want, to impose his love and his longing on a woman who was, for all practical purposes, a different person? These questions tormented him as the sun climbed higher in the sky. He heard Mirela stirring in the guest room around mid-morning, the soft sounds of movement filtering through the ancient castle walls. He heard water running as she washed, heard her footsteps as she moved about the room, heard the door open as she ventured out into the corridor. Every sound made his dead heart clench with anticipation and dread. She found him in the library, where he had retreated after sunrise. The library was his sanctuary, a vast room lined with thousands of books he had collected over the centuries. Tall windows let in the morning light, though Dracula had positioned himself in a corner where shadows still held sway. He was standing before a shelf of poetry when she entered, holding a leather-bound volume of verses he had not opened in decades. "Good morning," Mirela said from the doorway. Her voice was bright and cheerful, unmarked by the melancholy that had characterized their conversation the night before. She had changed back into her own clothes, now dry, though she still wore the shawl he had given her. "I hope I did not sleep too late. The bed was so comfortable I could have stayed there all day." "You are not late," Dracula said, setting the book aside and turning to face her. "I trust you slept well." "Very well," Mirela said, stepping into the library and looking around with undisguised wonder. "Oh my, this is magnificent. I have never seen so many books in a private collection. You must be a great reader." "I have had a great deal of time to read," Dracula said carefully, Books have been my companions when other company was not available. Mirela walked along the shelves, running her fingers lightly over the spines of the volumes. I see you have books in many languages, Latin, Greek, French, German, and these look like Romanian but written in an older script. You are clearly a scholar as well as a gentleman. I have studied many things, Dracula acknowledged. Knowledge is one of the few pursuits that never grows stale, no matter how long one lives. He paused, realizing his mistake, then added quickly, or so I imagine. I have only lived a normal span of years, of course, but I have tried to make the most of them. Mirela glanced at him with an expression he could not quite read. Of course, she said softly. She pulled a book from the shelf at random, a volume of poetry by Eminescu, and opened it to a page marked with a pressed flower. Someone loved this book very much, she observed, to mark it so carefully. Dracula felt a chill run through him. He remembered that flower, remembered Elena placing it there one afternoon as they sat together in this very room, reading poetry aloud to each other. She had picked it from the castle garden. A simple wildflower, she said, reminded her of hope. The fact that it had survived 300 years, preserved between the pages of the book, seemed impossible. Yet there it was, as if time itself had conspired to keep that small reminder of her alive. Yes, he said quietly, someone did love that book. Very much. Mirela studied the flower for a long moment, then carefully closed the book and replaced it on the shelf. You said last night that you lost someone you loved. Was she the one who marked these books? She was, Dracula admitted. There seemed little point in denying it. We spent many hours in this library together. She loved poetry, especially the romantic works. She believed that words could capture feelings that were otherwise too large and too overwhelming to express. She sounds wonderful, Mirela said gently. I'm sorry you lost her. So am I, Dracula said. Then, compelled by some impulse he did not fully understand, he added, She looked very much like you, actually. The resemblance is quite striking. Mirela turned to face him fully, her green eyes searching his face. Is that why you let me in last night? Because I reminded you of her. Partly, Dracula admitted, but also because it was the right thing to do. The resemblance was merely coincidence. Was it? Mirela asked. Her tone was not skeptical or challenging, merely curious. In my experience, there are very few true coincidences in this world. Things happen for reasons, even if we do not always understand those reasons at the time. Do you believe in fate? Dracula asked. In destiny? Mirela considered the question carefully. I believe that we are drawn to certain places and certain people, for reasons that go beyond simple chance. Whether you call that fate or destiny or simply the natural order of things, I cannot say. But I do not think my coming here last night was random. She smiled slightly, though I also do not presume to know what it means. What do you think it means? Dracula asked, taking a step toward her. She did not retreat, did not show any sign of fear or discomfort at his approach. Instead, she held his gaze steadily, those remarkable green eyes reflecting the morning light. I think, Mirela said slowly, that perhaps we are meant to help each other in some way. You have been alone in this castle for a very long time, mourning a loss you cannot let go. I have been wandering without roots or history, searching for something I cannot name. Perhaps we both need what the other can offer. And what is it you think I can offer you? Dracula asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Answers, Mirela said simply. Or if not answers, then at least the right questions. She wrapped the shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Last night when we spoke, I felt something. A recognition almost, as if some part of me knew you, even though we had never met. It was the strangest sensation, and I cannot explain it, but it made me think that perhaps my past is not as lost as I believed. Perhaps there are clues waiting to be discovered, connections waiting to be made. Dracula felt his breath catch. She felt it too then, the connection between them. Whatever it was, whatever it meant, it was not merely his imagination or his desperate longing. She sensed it as well, this invisible thread that seemed to bind them together. What do you remember? He asked. Before 5 years ago, before you woke in that hospital, is there anything at all? Dreams, feelings, impressions. Mirela closed her eyes, her brow furrowing in concentration. Sometimes I have dreams, she said. Fragments, really. Nothing coherent. I dream of mountains and castles, of moonlight and shadows. I dream of a man whose face I can never quite see, but who makes me feel safe and loved. And sometimes I dream of dying, of slipping away while someone holds me and whispers promises I cannot hear. She opened her eyes and looked at him. The doctors said these were not memories, but merely the mind trying to fill in the blanks, creating stories to explain the emptiness. But they feel like more than that. They feel real. Dracula struggled to keep his composure. She was describing Elena's death, or something very close to it. The mountains, the castle, the dying in his arms. How could she dream of these things if she had no memory of them? Unless the memories were not lost but merely buried, waiting for the right catalyst to bring them to the surface. "I have a proposition for you," he said carefully. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, driven by instinct and need rather than reason. "Stay here for a few days, rest from your journey. Explore the castle and the grounds. Perhaps being in this place will help trigger more of these dreams, more of these fragments, and if nothing comes of it, then at least you will have had a respite before continuing to Brasov." Mirela looked at him with surprise. "You would want me to stay? But I am a stranger to you. Surely you value your privacy." "I do," Dracula admitted, "but I am also curious. If you truly feel some connection to this place, to me, then it would be wrong to send you away without exploring what that might mean. And selfishly, I confess that I have enjoyed having company after so long alone. Your presence here is a welcome change." Mirela smiled, and the warmth of that smile made something loosen in Dracula's chest. "I would like that," she said, "if you are certain it is no imposition. I have no urgent need to be in Brasov. The school does not expect me for another week. A few days here in this beautiful place sounds lovely." "Then it is settled," Dracula said, relief flooding through him. "You will stay as my guest. I will show you the castle and the grounds, and we will see what memories or dreams might surface." They spent the rest of the morning together, wandering through the castle while Dracula pointed out various rooms and their histories. He found himself telling her stories he had not shared with anyone in centuries, tales of the people who had lived here long ago, the battles fought and the loves won and lost. Mirela listened with rapt attention, asking intelligent questions and offering observations that showed a keen mind and a deep sensitivity to the emotions underlying the stories. When they reached the portrait gallery, Mirela stopped before a painting that made Dracula's blood run cold. It was a portrait of Elena, commissioned during the brief weeks they had spent together before her death. She was depicted sitting in the castle garden, surrounded by flowers, her gentle smile capturing perfectly the sweetness of her nature. The artist had been skilled, rendering her features with photographic accuracy. It was like looking at a window into the past. "This is her," Mirela said softly. "The woman you loved. She looks so kind, so gentle." She turned to Dracula with those searching green eyes. "And you are right. The resemblance is remarkable. We could almost be sisters, or perhaps even the same person in different clothing." "Yes," Dracula said, his voice rough with emotion. "The resemblance is striking. When I first saw you last night, for a moment I thought I was seeing a ghost." "Do you believe in ghosts?" Mirela asked. "In spirits that linger after death?" "I have seen things in my life that defy easy explanation," Dracula said carefully. "I have learned not to dismiss any possibility out of hand. The world is far stranger and more mysterious than most people realize." Mirela looked at the portrait again, studying Elena's face with an intensity that made Dracula wonder what she was thinking. "What was her name?" she asked. "Elena," Dracula said. "Her name was Elena." "Elena," Mirela repeated softly, as if testing the sound of the name on her tongue. "It is a beautiful name." She touched the frame of the portrait lightly, almost reverently. "How did she die?" Dracula hesitated. The memory of Elena's death was still agonizing even after 3 centuries, a wound that had never fully healed. But something about Mirela's presence, her gentle curiosity and obvious compassion, made him want to share the truth, or at least as much of the truth as he could reveal without exposing what he truly was. "She fell ill," he said quietly. "A fever that came suddenly and took her within days. I was helpless to save her, All my knowledge, all my resources meant nothing in the face of that sickness. I held her as she died, and the last thing she said to me was that she would return, that I should wait for her and she would find her way back to me. He paused, swallowing against the tightness in his throat. So I have waited. For 300 years, I have waited. The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their honesty. Dracula had not meant to reveal so much, had not intended to confess the true span of his vigil, but now that the words were spoken, he could not take them back. Mirela turned to him slowly, her eyes wide. 300 years? But that is impossible. No one lives that long. Dracula met her gaze steadily. Some do, he said simply. Those who are cursed with a kind of life that is not truly life. Those who exist in the shadows between the living and the dead, sustained by forces they did not choose and cannot escape. He waited for her to recoil, to show fear or disgust or horror. Instead, Mirela simply looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. "You are telling me that you are not human," she said. It was not a question but a statement. "I am telling you that I am something other than human," Dracula confirmed. "Something that should frighten you, that should send you running from this castle as fast as your legs can carry you. But I am also the man who loved Elena with everything in him, who has mourned her for 3 centuries, and who swore to wait for her return no matter how long it took." Mirela was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then she said very calmly, "You are a vampire." "Yes," Dracula said. "I am Count Dracula, the monster from the old stories, the creature that haunts the nightmares of the villagers below. I am damned, cursed, a thing that should not exist. And yet I exist nonetheless, trapped in an eternity I never asked for, sustained by a promise I cannot abandon." He expected her to flee then, to scream or faint or react with any of the typical human responses to such a revelation. Instead, Mirela stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked quietly. "No," Dracula said immediately. "Never. I have not fed on human blood in 300 years, not since Elena died. I swore to honor her memory by rejecting the monster within, by clinging to whatever shreds of humanity remained to me. I live on the blood of animals and the occasional criminal who wanders too close to my domain. I am dangerous, yes, but not to you. Never to you." "Why not to me?" Mirela asked. "Because I look like Elena. Because you think I might be her returned to you. Because even if you are not Elena, even if you are simply a woman who bears a striking resemblance to her, you are innocent and deserve to be protected," Dracula said. "And because, yes, there is a chance, however small, that you are indeed her soul returned in a new body. And if that is true, then harming you would be the same as harming her, which I would sooner die than do." Mirela reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm, alive, utterly human. He had not felt such warmth in centuries, and the sensation nearly overwhelmed him. "I am not afraid of you," she said softly. "I should be, perhaps, but I am not. There is darkness in you, yes, but there is also great pain and great love. I can feel both as clearly as I can feel your hand in mine." "How can you not be afraid?" Dracula asked, bewildered by her calm acceptance. "I am a monster, a creature of the night, everything you have been taught to fear." "Because fear is not always the appropriate response to the unknown," Mirela said. "Sometimes understanding is more valuable than fear. And I understand that you are not merely a monster. You are a man who loved and lost, who made choices he regrets, who has been alone for far too long." She squeezed his hand gently. "I told you last night that I felt a connection to you. Now I understand why. Whatever I am, whoever I may have been, I am meant to be here. With you, at least for now." They stood together in the portrait gallery, hand in hand, while Elena's painted eyes seemed to watch them from the canvas. The morning light streaming through the windows painted them in gold and shadow, mortal and immortal joined by a mystery neither fully understood. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, bearing witness to yet another chapter in the long, strange story of Count Dracula, and the women fate kept bringing to his door. But if Mirela was not afraid of him, There were others who should be afraid, others who had their own reasons for wanting to find Castle Dracula and the creature who dwelled within. And those others were, even now, drawing closer, guided by faith and fury and the unshakable belief that evil must be destroyed wherever it hides. In the village of Borgo, at the base of the mountain, a small group of men gathered in the local church. They were led by a priest named Victor, a tall, gaunt man with eyes that burned with zealous fire. He stood before the altar, addressing his followers with a voice that shook with righteous anger. "Brothers," he said, his words echoing through the stone church, "for too long we have lived in the shadow of evil. For too long we have allowed the creature in that castle to exist unchallenged. Our ancestors cowered before him, but we will not. We will ascend that mountain, we will enter that cursed place, and we will destroy the vampire who has plagued these lands for centuries." The men murmured their agreement, crossing themselves and gripping their weapons tighter. They carried crosses and holy water, wooden stakes and silver blades, all the traditional tools for hunting the undead. Victor had spent months preparing them, training them, filling them with the conviction that they were holy warriors engaged in sacred work. But Victor's motivations went deeper than simple righteousness. He had a personal stake in this hunt, a wound that had never healed and never would until Dracula was destroyed. 3 centuries ago, Victor's ancestor had lost a sister to the vampire. The family had passed down the story through generations, along with a sacred vow that one day revenge would be taken. Victor had been raised on that vow, shaped by it, consumed by it. Destroying Dracula was not merely his duty, but his destiny. "He does not expect us," Victor told his followers. "He has grown complacent in his isolation. He believes himself safe in his mountain fortress. But we will prove him wrong. Tomorrow night, when the moon is full, we will attack. We will bring holy fire to that place of darkness, and we will send that monster back to the hell that spawned him." The men cheered, their voices rising to the rafters. None of them noticed the shadow that passed across one of the church windows, or the way the candles flickered as if touched by an unnatural breeze. None of them realized that forces beyond their understanding were already moving, drawn by the gathering of so much hatred and determination in one place. None of them suspected that their hunt for the vampire would set in motion events that would determine the fate of more than just one undead monster in a castle. And none of them, not even Victor himself, knew that at that very moment in the castle they planned to attack, a woman who might hold the key to everything was standing hand in hand with the creature they sought to destroy, beginning a journey that would test the limits of love, faith, and redemption itself. The sun climbed higher in the sky, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. In the castle, Dracula and Mirela continued their tour, talking and sharing stories, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing hour. And in the village, Victor and his men prepared for war, sharpening their blades and praying for strength, convinced that righteousness was on their side. 2 forces were moving toward collision, 2 paths were converging, and when they met, the resulting confrontation would shake the foundations of the world itself, forcing everyone involved to confront the most fundamental questions of existence. What is the nature of evil? Can love truly transcend death? Is redemption possible for those who have committed unforgivable acts? And most importantly, what happens when faith and love find themselves on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide? The answers would come soon enough. But first, there would be pain, there would be loss, there would be sacrifice, and there would be choices that no one was prepared to make. Choices that would determine not just the fate of individuals, but the very balance between light and darkness, in a world that had forgotten how thin that line truly was. The second chapter of this tale was ending, but the story itself was only beginning. And like all the best stories, like all the truest stories, it would be written in blood and tears, in hope and despair, in the eternal struggle between what we are and what we wish to become. Mirela felt it before she understood it, a tremor of recognition that ran through her like electricity when Dracula revealed his true nature. She should have been terrified. Every instinct of self-preservation should have been screaming at her to run, to escape, to put as much distance as possible between herself and this creature of nightmare. But instead, she felt only a strange sense of rightness, as if some part of her had always known what he was and had been waiting for him to finally admit it. As they walked through the castle together that afternoon, Mirela found herself studying him with new eyes. Now that she knew the truth, she could see the signs she had missed before. The way he moved with impossible grace, the way his skin seemed too pale, too perfect, unmarked by age or sun, the way shadows clung to him, even in well-lit rooms, as if darkness itself recognized him as kin. And yet none of these things frightened her. If anything, they made her more curious, more determined to understand the mystery that connected them. "Tell me about Elena," she said, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the mountains. "Tell me everything. How you met, how you fell in love, what she meant to you." Dracula was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. "She was a peasant girl from a village that no longer exists," he said finally. "She came to the castle one day bearing a gift of bread and honey, payment for some protection I had offered her family against bandits. I was not supposed to interact with her. I was supposed to simply accept the gift and send her away. But when she smiled at me, when she looked at me without fear or hatred, something in me broke." He paused, his hands gripping the balcony railing so tightly that the stone cracked beneath his fingers. "I invited her to stay for tea, then for dinner, then overnight because the road was dangerous. Each time I told myself it would be the last time, that I would send her away and return to my isolation, but I could not. She saw something in me that I thought had died centuries before. She saw the man I had been before the curse, the nobleman who had once believed in honor and beauty and love, and in seeing that, she called it back to life." "What happened?" Mirela asked gently. "How did she die?" "The fever came suddenly," Dracula said. "One day she was fine, laughing and reading poetry in the library. The next day she could barely stand. I brought doctors from as far away as Vienna, healers who knew secrets lost to modern medicine. None of them could help. The fever burned through her like wildfire, consuming her from within. By the third day, she was delirious. By the fifth, she was dying." His voice broke on the last word, and Mirela saw something she would not have thought possible. Tears, actual tears, sliding down the cheeks of a creature who was supposed to be beyond such human weakness. She reached out and touched his face, wiping the tears away with her fingers. "She begged me not to turn her," Dracula continued. "She knew what I was by then. I had told her everything, hoping that honesty might somehow protect her from the curse that surrounded me. She begged me to let her die human, to let her soul remain pure and unsullied by the darkness that had claimed mine. And I agreed. God help me, I agreed, because I loved her more than I loved my own existence, and I could not bear to damn her to the hell I inhabited." "So you let her go," Mirela said softly. "You honored her wishes even though it destroyed you." "Yes," Dracula said, and with her last breath, she promised to return. She said that love as strong as ours could not be ended by something as small as death. She said she would find a way back to me, that I should wait, and she would come. And so, I have waited. For 300 years, I have waited." Mirela felt tears on her own cheeks now, though she could not have said why she was crying. The story touched something deep within her, something that resonated with the fragments of dreams and feelings that made up her scattered sense of self. "And you think I might be her," she said, returned as she promised. "I do not know what to think," Dracula admitted. "You look like her. You feel like her. And your lack of memory, your dreams of castles and dying in someone's arms, they all suggest a connection. But I have been disappointed before. I have seen women who resembled her, and convinced myself they were Elena returned, only to be proven wrong. I do not know if I can survive that kind of disappointment again." "Then we will find out together," Mirela said firmly. "We will explore this mystery, follow wherever it leads. And if I am Elena, if that is truly who I was before the amnesia, then perhaps my memories will return. And if I am not, if I am simply Mirela and nothing more, then at least we will know the truth. Either way, you will not be alone in this." Dracula looked at her with an expression of such vulnerability and hope that it made her heart ache. "Why are you not afraid of me?" he asked again. "Why do you trust me when everything logical and rational says you should not?" Because fear is not always wisdom, Mirela said, and because something inside me, something deeper than thought or reason, tells me that you are not the monster you believe yourself to be. You are a man who loved and lost, who has been alone for far too long, who deserves a chance at redemption. She smiled, reaching up to touch his face again. And perhaps I'm a woman who needs to remember who she is. Perhaps we both need what the other can offer. They stood together on the balcony as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Below them, the mountains stretched endlessly, ancient and eternal, and somewhere in those mountains, danger was gathering. But for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them, vampire and mortal, mystery and hope, standing on the edge of a truth that would change everything. The second chapter was closing. The third was about to begin, and with it would come trials neither of them was prepared to face, revelations that would shake them to their core, and choices that would determine not just their own fates, but the fate of love itself. The story was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. That night, Mirela dreamed. She stood in a garden bathed in moonlight, surrounded by flowers whose names she did not know, but whose scents filled her with inexplicable longing. The air was warm despite the late hour, carrying with it the promise of summer and the whisper of secrets waiting to be discovered. She wore a simple white dress that moved like water around her body, and her feet were bare against the cool grass. She was waiting for someone. She knew this with absolute certainty, though she could not have said who or why. Her heart beat faster with anticipation, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to adjust a flower she had woven into her hair. Everything felt both utterly foreign and deeply familiar, as if she were remembering and experiencing simultaneously, caught in that strange space between past and present. Then he appeared, a tall figure emerging from the shadows at the garden's edge, moving with a grace that seemed almost inhuman. She could not see his face clearly, but she knew him. Her soul recognized him before her mind could catch up, and she felt tears spring to her eyes for reasons she could not articulate. "You came," she heard herself say, and the voice was hers, but also not hers, younger and sweeter, touched with an accent she no longer possessed. "I will always come to you," the figure replied, and now she could see him more clearly. Dark hair, pale skin, eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected it back like mirrors. He stopped before her and reached out to cup her face in his hands, his touch cool but gentle. "You are my heart, my hope, the only light in my darkness. And you are my beloved," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. The kiss was soft and tender, filled with a love so profound it seemed to alter the very fabric of reality around them. When they parted, she was crying, though whether from joy or sorrow she could not tell. "Promise me," she said urgently, gripping his arms. "Promise me that if anything happens, if we are separated, you will wait for me. You will not give up hope." "Nothing will separate us," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice, a tremor of fear that belied his confident words. "Promise me," she insisted. "Swear it on everything you hold sacred. I will return to you. No matter how long it takes, no matter what form I must take, I will find my way back. But you must wait. You must believe." "I promise," he said, pulling her close. "I will wait for you until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble to dust. I will wait for you until the end of time itself." They held each other as the garden began to fade, the flowers losing their color, the moonlight dimming. She felt herself slipping away, being pulled toward some vast darkness, and she clung to him with desperate strength. "Do not forget me," she whispered as the world dissolved around them. "Do not forget our love." "Never," he said, and his voice echoed through the growing void. "Never, never, never." Mirela woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the unfamiliar bed. Her heart was racing and her face was wet with tears. For a moment she could not remember where she was, could not distinguish between dream and reality. The garden still felt more real than the room around her, the man's touch more tangible than the blankets clutched in her trembling hands. Then memory reasserted itself. She was in Castle Dracula. She had agreed to stay for a few days. She had learned that her host was a vampire, and instead of fleeing in terror, she had held his hand and promised to help him discover the truth of their connection. The dream. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold on to the images before they faded, as dreams always did. But these images were not fading. If anything, they were growing sharper, more detailed. She could still smell the garden flowers, could still feel the texture of the man's coat beneath her fingers, could still taste the sweetness of his kiss on her lips. That was not a dream. The realization struck her with the force of revelation. That was a memory, a real memory from before the amnesia, from before the 5 years of emptiness that marked the boundary of her conscious existence. She had stood in that garden. She had loved that man. She had made him promise to wait for her. And that man had been Dracula. She threw off the covers and stood, pacing the room in agitation. This changed everything. If the dream was a memory, if she truly had lived before and loved before, then perhaps she really was Elena. Perhaps the impossible story Dracula had told her was not impossible at all, but simple truth. She had died 300 years ago and had somehow inexplicably returned. But how? How was such a thing possible? And if she was Elena, why did she have no other memories? Why could she not remember anything beyond that single scene in the garden? What force or mechanism had allowed her soul to return, but had stripped away all knowledge of her previous existence? She needed answers. She needed to talk to Dracula, to tell him about the dream, to see if it matched his memories of Elena. But it was still the middle of the night, and she hesitated to wake him. Did vampires even sleep? She realized she knew almost nothing about what he actually was, beyond the basic legends everyone had heard. As if in answer to her unspoken question, there was a soft knock at her door. "Mirela?" Dracula's voice came from the other side. "Are you awake?" "I heard you cry out." She crossed to the door and opened it. He stood in the corridor, dressed in dark clothing that made him look like a living shadow. His eyes were bright with concern, and she noticed that he kept a careful distance, respecting her space, even in his worry. "I am fine," she said. "I had a dream. Or rather, I think I had a memory." She stepped back, gesturing him into the room. "Please come in. I need to tell you about it." Dracula entered cautiously, as if afraid his presence might somehow contaminate her. He stood near the door while she moved to sit on the edge of the bed, trying to organize her thoughts. When she looked up at him, she saw hope and fear warring in his expression, and her heart went out to him. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what did you remember?" So she did. She described the garden, the moonlight, the flowers, the feeling of waiting for someone beloved. She described the man who had emerged from the shadows, the kiss they had shared, the promises they had made to each other. As she spoke, she watched Dracula's face and saw recognition dawn there, followed by something that looked like pain. "That happened," he said when she finished, "almost exactly as you described it. The garden behind the castle, 300 years ago. The night before Elena fell ill. She made me promise to wait for her, though at the time I thought she was simply being romantic. I did not understand that she was somehow foreseeing what was to come." "Then it is true," Mirela said, and her voice shook slightly. "I am her. I am Elena. Somehow, impossibly, I have returned." Dracula moved toward her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching at his sides. "I want to believe that," he said. "God knows how desperately I want to believe that. But a single memory is not proof. Dreams can be influenced by stories we have heard, by suggestions planted in our waking minds. You might simply be remembering what I told you yesterday, recasting it as a dream to make sense of the connection you feel." "No," Mirela said firmly. "This was not like that. This was real. I could feel the grass beneath my feet, smell the flowers, taste your kiss." She stood and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. "I understand your caution. I understand why you would be afraid to hope. But I am not afraid. I remember you. I remember loving you. I remember making that promise." She paused, then added softly, "And I remember dying." Dracula's eyes widened. "You remember your death?" Mirela nodded slowly. "It came to me as I was waking, another fragment. I was in bed, burning with fever. You were sitting beside me, holding my hand, and I could see the anguish in your eyes. I wanted to comfort you, to tell you that it would be all right, but I was too weak. I remember thinking that I could not leave you, that I had to find a way back. And then there was darkness, and then nothing, until I woke up 5 years ago in that hospital with no memory of anything. 5 years ago, Dracula said thoughtfully, not 300 years ago. So where were you for the other 295 years? If you died in my arms 3 centuries ago, and you only regained consciousness 5 years ago, what happened in between? I do not know, Mirela admitted. Perhaps souls do not experience time the way living beings do. Perhaps what seemed like an instant to me was centuries to you. Or perhaps I was somewhere else, somewhere outside of normal existence, waiting for the right moment to return. Or perhaps, a cold voice said from the doorway, she is not Elena at all, but something far more sinister. They both spun around to find a figure standing in the doorway, a tall man with gaunt features and eyes that burned with zealous fire. He wore the black robes of a priest and carried a silver cross in one hand and a wooden stake in the other. Behind him, Mirela could see other men armed with similar weapons spreading through the corridor. "Father Victor," Dracula said, and his voice had gone flat and dangerous. "I should have sensed your approach. But I was distracted." "As I intended," Victor said, stepping into the room. "The holy oil we anointed ourselves with masks our presence from demonic senses, a useful trick when hunting the undead." He looked at Mirela with undisguised contempt. "Step away from the creature, woman. He has you under some kind of enchantment, but I can break it. You will be safe once he is destroyed." "I am not under any enchantment," Mirela said, moving closer to Dracula rather than away from him. "And you will not hurt him." Victor's expression hardened. "So he has you thoroughly in his thrall. Unfortunate, but not surprising. The vampire has always been skilled at corrupting the innocent. But it ends tonight." He raised the stake, pointing it at Dracula like an accusation. 300 years ago, you took my ancestor's sister. You drained her life and cast aside her body like refuse. My family has waited generations to avenge that crime. And now, finally, justice will be done. I have not killed a human being in 300 years, Dracula said, his voice cold. Your ancestor's sister, if she even existed, died long before I forswore such practices. I will not be held accountable for actions taken in a different age when I was a different creature. Once a monster, always a monster, Victor spat. You cannot change your nature any more than a serpent can become a dove. Your very existence is an affront to God and nature. And this woman, he gestured at Mirela with disgust, if she defends you, then she is as corrupted as you are and beyond salvation. The hunters behind Victor began to move into the room, forming a semicircle around Dracula and Mirela. They carried crossbows, loaded with wooden bolts, stakes, and containers of what Mirela assumed was holy water. They moved with the confidence of men who believed righteousness was on their side, who were absolutely certain of their cause. Mirela felt Dracula tense beside her, felt the predatory power that had been carefully leashed suddenly strain against its bonds. She knew that if violence erupted, people would die. The hunters would die because they were merely human facing a creature of supernatural strength. But Dracula might also die if they managed to stake him or burn him before he could defend himself, and she could not allow that to happen. "Wait," she said, stepping forward with her hands raised. "Please just wait. You do not understand what is happening here." "I understand perfectly," Victor said. "A vampire has charmed you, turned you into his willing victim. It is a tragedy, but a preventable one. Step aside, woman. Let us do what must be done." "My name is Mirela," she said firmly, "and I am not charmed or controlled or in any way diminished by my own choices. I am here because I want to be, because I need to be, because I might be the reincarnation of the woman Count Dracula loved 300 years ago, and if that is true, then you are trying to kill the one person in the world who might be able to save him." Victor laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Save him? Save a vampire? Woman, you are deluded. Vampires are soulless creatures of hell. They cannot be saved, cannot be redeemed. They can only be destroyed, sent back to the pit that spawned them." "Is that what your faith teaches you?" Mirela asked. "That God's mercy has limits? That redemption is impossible for those who have sinned too greatly?" She looked around at the other hunters, meeting their eyes one by one. "Is that truly what you believe? That some souls are beyond salvation?" "Some creatures have no souls to save," Victor said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, a crack in his zealous certainty. "Count Dracula has a soul," Mirela insisted. "I have seen it. I have felt it. He is tormented by his past, haunted by his crimes, desperate for redemption. He has not killed a human being in 300 years because he swore to honor the memory of the woman he loved. If that is not the action of someone with a soul, someone capable of change and growth, then I do not know what is." She turned to Dracula, who was watching her with an expression of stunned amazement. "Tell them," she said, "tell them what you told me. About Elena, about your promise, about the 3 centuries you have spent trying to be worthy of her memory." Dracula was silent for a long moment, and Mirela wondered if she had miscalculated, if his pride or his fear or his fatalistic acceptance of his own damnation would prevent him from speaking. But then he began to talk, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Her name was Elena," he said. "She was a peasant girl who saw past the monster to the man I had once been. She loved me despite what I was. And in loving me, she gave me hope that I might become something better. When she died, I wanted to die with her, but I had made her a promise to wait for her, to believe that love was stronger than death. So I have waited. I have endured. I have tried to become worthy of that love, that faith." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not expect redemption. I have done things in my long existence that are unforgivable, that merit nothing but damnation. But I have tried to change. I have tried to be better, and if that means nothing, if I am to be destroyed regardless, then so be it. But do not mistake my willingness to die for an admission that I am incapable of good. Do not assume that because I am a monster, I cannot love, cannot grow, cannot hope." The room fell silent. The hunters exchanged uncertain glances, their weapons lowering slightly. Even Victor seemed taken aback by the raw honesty of Dracula's words. The absolute certainty that had driven them up the mountain was beginning to crack, undermined by the uncomfortable realization that their quarry was more complex than the simple monster of legend they had expected to find. "This is a trick," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Some demonic deception meant to stay our hands." "It is the truth," Mirela said quietly, "and deep down you know it. You can feel it." She looked at the priest with compassion rather than anger. "I understand your pain. I understand the need for justice, for closure, but this is not the way. Destroying him will not heal whatever wound drives you. It will only add to the darkness in the world." Victor's hand shook slightly where he gripped the stake. For a long moment he stood frozen, torn between his lifelong purpose and the dawning realization that perhaps the world was not as simple as he had believed. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "What would you have us do?" he asked, and the question held genuine uncertainty, the first crack in his armor of righteousness. "Go home," Mirela said. "Return to your village. Let us explore the mystery that has brought me here." "If I truly am," Elena returned, "if love truly can transcend death, then perhaps that is proof that God's plan is more miraculous and more generous than we have imagined. And if I am wrong, if I am simply a deluded woman defending a monster, then you can return and do what you believe must be done. But give us time. Give us a chance to discover the truth." Victor looked from Mirela to Dracula and back again, his expression troubled. Then he turned to his men. "Stand down," he ordered. "We are leaving." There were protests from some of the hunters, arguments that they had come too far to turn back now, but Victor silenced them with a sharp gesture. "We came here to destroy a monster," he said, "but what we have found is far more complicated. We will give them 1 week, 7 days to discover what truth lies between them." And then he looked at Dracula with hard eyes. "We will return. And if we find that you have harmed this woman, or that your words were lies meant to manipulate us, there will be no mercy, no more hesitation. We will end you." "That is fair," Dracula said quietly. "I ask for nothing more than the chance to prove that redemption is possible, even for creatures such as I." The hunters filed out of the room, their weapons lowered but not sheathed, their expressions a mixture of confusion and disappointment. Victor was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway, looking back at Mirela. "I will pray for you," he said. I will pray that you are not making a terrible mistake. And I will pray that you find peace, Mirela replied, whatever that may look like. Victor nodded once, then disappeared into the corridor. The sound of footsteps echoed through the castle as the hunters made their way back to the entrance. And then there was silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth, and the sound of Mirela's rapid breathing as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade. "You defended me," Dracula said, his voice filled with wonder. "You stood between me and men who wanted to kill me, and you defended me." "Of course I did," Mirela said. "You are not a monster, no matter what they believe. You are a man who has made mistakes, who has been alone for too long, who deserves a chance at something better." "How can you be so certain?" Dracula asked. "You barely know me. You have no proof that I am what I claim to be, that my words about Elena are true. For all you know, I could be exactly the monster Victor believes me to be, manipulating you for my own purposes. I do not know how I know," Mirela said, "but I do know. Something inside me recognizes you, trusts you, believes in you." She moved closer to him, reaching up to touch his face. "And the dream, the memory, that was real. I felt it in every fiber of my being. Whatever I am, whoever I may have been, I am connected to you in ways that transcend logic or proof." Dracula closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "If you are truly Elena," he said softly, "if you have truly returned to me after all these years, then I do not deserve such grace. I do not deserve such mercy." "Perhaps none of us deserve the grace we receive," Mirela said. "Perhaps that is the point of grace." They stood together in the aftermath of the interrupted violence, vampire and mortal, mystery and hope, connected by threads invisible but unbreakable. Outside, the night continued its eternal journey toward dawn, and somewhere in the darkness, both threat and promise waited, watching and wondering how this strange story would unfold. Victor and his men had been turned away, but they would return. 7 days was not much time to unravel a mystery, 300 years in the making. 7 days to discover if love could truly transcend death, if souls could be reborn, if redemption was possible for those who had committed unforgivable sins. 7 days to find the truth. 7 days to change the course of eternity itself. The hunters had gone, but the castle felt different now, charged with new urgency. Dracula and Mirela stood in her room, both acutely aware that they had been given a deadline, a ticking clock counting down to a confrontation that might end in his destruction. The stakes, already high, had become absolute. "We have to find the truth," Dracula said. "Whatever it takes, whatever we must do, we have to discover whether you are truly Elena before Victor returns." "How?" Mirela asked. "How do we prove something like that? My memory is returning in fragments, but slowly. There is no guarantee I will remember everything in time." Dracula was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "There may be a way. There are places in this castle, places tied to my history with Elena, that might trigger stronger memories. And there are rituals, old magic from before I became what I am. That might help unlock what is buried in your mind." "Magic?" Mirela asked. "Real magic." "As real as I am," Dracula said. "The world contains forces that most people have forgotten or refuse to believe in. Vampirism itself is a kind of magic, a corruption of natural law. If dark magic can create a monster, perhaps older, purer magic can restore what was lost." "Then we start tomorrow," Mirela said firmly. "We visit these places, perform these rituals, do whatever we must. We will find the truth." Dracula looked at her with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "Elena was gentle and kind, but she was not fearless as you are. She would have been terrified by hunters breaking into her room. But you faced them without hesitation, defended me without doubt. Perhaps that is what 300 years as a disembodied soul does to a person," Mirela said with a slight smile. "It burns away fear and leaves only certainty. Or perhaps I am not Elena, and I am simply a very stubborn woman who has never learned to back down from a challenge. Or perhaps," Dracula said, returning her smile with one of his own, "you are both. Elena's soul, but tempered by whatever journey brought you back to me, shaped into something stronger and more resilient. Love returned, but love transformed. "I like that idea," Mirela said. "It feels true somehow." She moved to the window and looked out at the night sky. The moon was nearly full, hanging low on the horizon. 7 days, she said. The moon will be completely full before then. "Is that significant?" "In the old magic, yes," Dracula said, joining her at the window. "The full moon is a time of completion, of revelation, of things hidden being brought to light. If we are to attempt a ritual to restore your memories fully, it should be done under the full moon for maximum effect. Then we have 4 days to prepare," Mirela calculated. 4 days to visit the places connected to your past with Elena, to gather whatever we need for the ritual, to ready ourselves for whatever truth we might discover. 4 days, Dracula agreed. "And if we succeed, if we prove that you are Elena returned, then when Victor and his hunters come back, we will have the truth to show them. Proof that redemption is possible, that love can transcend even death itself." "And if we fail?" Mirela asked quietly. "If I am not Elena, if I am simply a woman who looks like her and dreams strange dreams?" Dracula was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "If we fail, I will not ask you to defend me again. I will face whatever judgment Victor brings, and I will accept it. Perhaps that would be the mercy I deserve. The ending I have been delaying for too long." "No," Mirela said sharply, turning to face him. "I will not let that happen. Whether I am Elena or Mirela or someone else entirely, I will not stand aside and watch them destroy you. You deserve better. You deserve a chance at the life you have been trying to build for 3 centuries. "Why do you care so much?" Dracula asked, searching her face. "Even if you are not Elena, even if this connection between us is simply coincidence and wishful thinking, why would you risk yourself for a monster?" "Because you are not a monster," Mirela said. "How many times do I have to say it before you believe me? You are a man. A complicated, damaged, beautiful man who has been alone for far too long." She reached out and took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "And because, whether I am Elena or not, I feel something for you, something real and strong and undeniable. Call it love, call it recognition, call it fate. I do not care what name we give it, but I will not walk away from it. I will not abandon you." Dracula looked down at their joined hands, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I have not held hands with another person in 300 years. Such a simple gesture, but it feels like a miracle." "Then let us make the most of it," Mirela said softly. "Let us use the time we have been given. Let us search for truth, and if we find it, wonderful. And if we do not, then at least we will have tried. At least we will have had these days together." They stood at the window as the moon climbed higher in the sky, hands clasped, hearts open to whatever mysteries awaited them. The castle that had been Dracula's prison for 3 centuries suddenly felt like a place of possibility, of hope, of transformation. And though danger still lurked in the darkness, though Victor and his hunters would return with fire and faith, for now there was only this moment, this connection, this fragile and precious beginning. The 3rd chapter was ending, but the real journey was only beginning. In the days ahead, they would walk through the shadows of the past, confront truths both beautiful and terrible, and discover whether love truly could overcome death itself. They would test the limits of faith and magic, hope and despair, human and monster. And when the full moon rose on the 7th night, when the ritual was complete and the truth finally revealed, they would face whatever came with courage and grace, knowing that they had found each other across the gulf of centuries, across the boundaries of life and death, across every obstacle that should have kept them apart. The story was accelerating now, building toward a climax that would determine the fate of souls both mortal and immortal. And at the center of it all stood 2 figures, vampire and woman, past and present, promise and fulfillment, reaching toward each other across an impossible divide, with hope that love might be the bridge that finally brings them home. The next 4 days passed like a fever dream, each moment charged with purpose and discovery. Dracula guided Mirela through the castle, revealing rooms and corridors that had been closed for centuries, each space holding fragments of his history with Elena. And with each revelation, Mirela felt more memories stirring in the depths of her consciousness, like creatures awakening from long hibernation. The first place he took her was the garden where her dream had occurred. In the daylight, it was overgrown and wild, 300 years of neglect having transformed the carefully tended beds into a riot of untamed beauty. Vines climbed the stone walls. Flowers that Elena had planted had seeded themselves again and again, creating unexpected combinations of color and form. Trees had grown tall and thick, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into patterns of gold and shadow. This was her favorite place, Dracula said, as they walked the winding paths. She would spend hours here, tending the plants, talking to them as if they could understand. She believed that everything living had a soul, even the smallest flower. She said that caring for growing things kept her connected to the divine, reminded her that life was sacred. Mirela knelt beside a patch of wildflowers, touching their petals gently. "I remember this," she said softly. "Not clearly, not completely, but I remember the feeling, the peace of being here, the sense of purpose." She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and growing things. "I planted roses here, white roses for purity, and lavender for devotion." "Yes," Dracula said, his voice rough with emotion, "the roses are long gone, but the lavender has persisted. It grows wild now throughout the garden, as if refusing to be forgotten." Mirela opened her eyes and looked at him. "She made this place for you," she said with sudden certainty. "She knew you could not walk in sunlight easily, so she created a garden that would be beautiful at night. The white flowers that glowed in the moonlight, the night-blooming jasmine, the pale roses that looked like ghosts in the darkness. This was her gift to you." "It was," Dracula confirmed, "and I have maintained it after a fashion, even after she died. I could not bear to let it fall into complete ruin. Every few decades I would clear the paths, prune the most invasive growth, ensure that something of her vision remained. It became a ritual, a way of keeping her memory alive." They sat together on a stone bench near the center of the garden, surrounded by the evidence of Elena's love and Dracula's faithfulness. The sun was warm on Mirela's face, and she tilted her head back, letting the light wash over her. For the first time since waking in that hospital 5 years ago, she felt a sense of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. "Tell me more about her," Mirela said. "Tell me things I would not remember from dreams or fragments. Tell me who she was as a person." Dracula was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "She was kind," he said finally, "genuinely, deeply kind in a way that is rare in any age. She saw suffering and wanted to ease it. She saw loneliness and wanted to fill it. When she came to the castle that first time, she brought not just bread and honey, but also medicine for my servants, even though they were strangers to her." He paused, smiling at the memory. "She was also stubborn. Once she decided something was right, nothing could sway her. I tried to send her away dozens of times, tried to convince her that being near me was dangerous. She refused to listen. She said that love was always dangerous, that anything worth having was worth risking everything for. That sounds like something I would say," Mirela murmured. "Even now, even without the memories, I believe that." "She loved learning," Dracula continued. "She had very little formal education, being a peasant girl, but she was hungry for knowledge. I taught her to read properly, gave her access to my library, and she devoured books like a starving person given food. Poetry was her favorite, but she also loved philosophy, history, even natural sciences. She wanted to understand everything, to make sense of the world. And she loved you," Mirela said. "Despite what you were, despite the danger, she loved me because of what I was," Dracula corrected. "She said that anyone could love someone who was easy to love, someone who was perfect and uncomplicated. But to love someone who was broken, someone who carried darkness within them, that was when love truly meant something. She believed that love was not just an emotion, but a choice, a decision to see the best in someone, even when they could not see it themselves." Mirela felt tears sliding down her cheeks, though she was smiling. "She sounds extraordinary, like someone I would want to be." "You are her," Dracula said softly. "I am more certain of it with every moment we spend together. The way you speak, the way you think, the way you see the world, It is all Elena, but refined, strengthened, perfected by whatever journey brought you back to me. They spent the morning in the garden, talking and remembering, and with each conversation, Mirela felt more pieces of herself falling into place. It was like assembling a puzzle, each memory a piece that revealed more of the larger picture. By the time they returned to the castle for lunch, she had remembered dozens of small moments. The first time Elena had laughed at one of Dracula's dry observations. The evening they had danced together in the moonlight, with no music but the wind in the trees. The morning she had awakened to find him watching her sleep, his expression so tender it had made her heart ache. The second place Dracula took her was his private chambers, a suite of rooms he had not allowed anyone to enter in 300 years. The door was locked with multiple bolts, and when he opened it, the air that rushed out smelled of dust and time and secrets long kept. "I have preserved everything exactly as it was," he said as they entered. "After Elena died, I locked these rooms and swore never to change anything. It seemed important somehow to keep this space frozen in that moment, as if by refusing to move forward, I could somehow prevent the past from fading completely." The rooms were beautiful, decorated in the style of 3 centuries ago, but with a feminine touch that spoke of Elena's influence. The bed was enormous, draped in silk and velvet that had faded with age. The walls were covered in tapestries depicting pastoral scenes, gardens and forests and gentle creatures. Books were stacked on every surface, and the writing desk near the window held papers covered in elegant script. "Are those her writings?" Mirela asked, moving toward the desk. "Yes," Dracula said. "She kept a journal during her time here. She also wrote poetry, though she never showed most of it to me. I found it after she died, along with letters she had written but never sent." "May I read them?" Mirela asked. "Of course," Dracula said. "They are yours, after all." "You wrote them." Mirela sat at the desk and carefully picked up one of the journals, opening it to a random page. The handwriting was unfamiliar to her, but the words themselves resonated with a deep sense of recognition. She began to read aloud. "Today he showed me the library, and I thought I might die of happiness. So many books, so much knowledge waiting to be discovered. He tries to hide it, but I can see how pleased he is that I am interested in learning. He is not the monster everyone believes him to be. He is a man who has been hurt, who has made terrible choices, but who still carries within him the capacity for great love. I see it in the way he tends to injured animals, in the way he speaks of the people who once lived in this castle, in the way he looks at me when he thinks I am not watching. He believes himself damned beyond redemption, but I know better. Love can redeem anything, even a vampire, especially a vampire." Mirela's voice broke on the last words, and she set the journal down with trembling hands. "I wrote that," she said wonderingly. "I believed that. I loved you so completely that I thought love alone could save you." "You did save me," Dracula said, kneeling beside the desk. "Perhaps not in the way you intended, not by breaking the curse or restoring my mortality, but you saved my soul. You gave me a reason to be better, to try harder, to believe that I was more than the sum of my worst acts." Mirela turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. "And you loved me so completely that you waited 300 years for me to return. How many people can say they have been loved like that? How many people have someone who would wait an eternity for them?" They kissed then, and it was different from the kiss in the garden memory. That kiss had been soft and tentative, filled with the uncertainty of new love. This kiss was deeper, more certain, weighted with 300 years of longing and loss. It was a promise and a reclamation, a recognition and a renewal. It was the kiss of 2 souls who had found each other again after an impossible separation. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and Mirela saw something in Dracula's eyes she had not seen before. Not just love or hope, but hunger. The vampire's hunger, barely restrained, held in check by will alone. She should have been frightened, should have pulled away. Instead, she leaned closer. "You have not fed properly in a long time," she said. "I can see it in your eyes. You are weakening yourself to maintain control around me." "I will not risk hurting you," Dracula said firmly. "I would rather starve than take even a drop of your blood without permission." What if I gave you permission? Mirela asked quietly. Dracula pulled back as if burned. No, absolutely not. Elena begged me not to turn her, not to make her what I am. I will honor that wish, even now. I will not taint you with my curse. I'm not asking you to turn me, Mirela said. I'm asking you to feed, to take what you need to survive, to remain strong for what is coming. Victor and his hunters will return in 3 days. If you are weak, if you cannot defend yourself, then everything we are trying to accomplish will be for nothing. Mirela, Dracula said, his voice strained, you do not understand what you are asking. To feed from you, to taste your blood, it would create a connection between us that cannot be easily broken. You would be bound to me in ways that go beyond the physical, beyond even the emotional. It is a kind of intimacy that most humans cannot comprehend. Then help me comprehend it, Mirela said. Explain what it would mean. Dracula stood and moved to the window, putting distance between them. When a vampire feeds from a human, he said, they experience not just the physical sensation of drinking blood, but also fragments of that person's thoughts, memories, emotions. It is an invasion of privacy, an intrusion into the deepest parts of the self. And the human, in turn, experiences some of what the vampire is feeling. It creates a bond, a link that can last for years, even decades. He turned to face her, his expression pained. With Elena, I never fed from her. Not once. I could not bear the thought of invading her mind that way, of taking something so intimate without being able to offer anything in return. And now you are asking me to do the very thing I refused to do with her. I am asking you to trust that I know what I am offering, Mirela said, standing and moving toward him. I am asking you to accept that I am not the same fragile peasant girl who needed to be protected from every danger. I have survived things you cannot imagine. I have been lost and found myself again. I am strong enough to handle whatever connection might form between us. She reached him and took his hands, holding them tightly. And perhaps, she continued, perhaps that connection is exactly what we need. If my memories are locked away, if there is some barrier preventing me from remembering everything, then maybe experiencing your memories of Elena will help break down that barrier. Maybe seeing myself through your eyes will help me remember who I was. Dracula looked at her for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. Finally he said, if we do this, if I feed from you, it must be done properly, not in hunger or desperation, but as a ritual, with intention and respect. And only if you are absolutely certain this is what you want. I am certain, Mirela said without hesitation. I trust you. I trust us. And I believe this is part of the journey we are meant to take together. Very well, Dracula said softly, but not here, not in these rooms where Elena died. If we are to do this, it should be in a place of strength and power, a place where the magic of the castle is strongest. Where? Mirela asked. The tower, Dracula said, the highest point of the castle, where the moonlight is brightest and the connection between earth and sky is thinnest. We will perform the ritual there tomorrow night, when the moon is nearly full. And in doing so, we will prepare the way for the greater ritual that must come on the night of the full moon itself. The third day was spent in preparation. Dracula took Mirela to the castle's library and showed her ancient texts written in languages she should not have been able to read, but somehow could. Latin, Greek, even older tongues that had died out centuries before. The words seemed to shimmer on the pages, revealing their meanings directly to her mind. These are grimoires, Dracula explained. Books of ritual magic collected over centuries. Some are from before my time, inherited from the original lords of this castle. Others I acquired in my travels, seeking knowledge that might one day break my curse or at least help me understand it. Mirela paged through one of the volumes, her eyes widening as she read. These rituals are about transformation, she said, about changing one state of being into another, mortal to immortal, dead to undead, but also the reverse, immortal to mortal, cursed to blessed. Yes, Dracula said, I have spent centuries studying these texts, searching for a way to become human again, to undo what was done to me. But the price is always too high, the requirements too impossible. Most of the rituals require the willing sacrifice of someone who loves the cursed, being unconditionally. And I would never ask such a thing, not from Elena, not from anyone. What if someone offered? Mirela asked, looking up from the book. What if the sacrifice was freely given? Then it would be the greatest gift imaginable, Dracula said quietly, but also the greatest burden. To accept such a sacrifice, to allow someone to give up their life so that you might be free, how does one live with that? How does one justify such a choice? Perhaps by living well, Mirela said, by making sure that the sacrifice was not in vain, that the life granted was used for good, for beauty, for love. She set down the book and moved closer to him. But we are not at that point yet. First we must complete the blood ritual, then the full moon ceremony. And only after we have discovered the full truth of who I am, can we think about what comes next. You are remarkably calm about all of this, Dracula observed. Most people would be terrified, confronting magic and vampires and the prospect of dangerous rituals. Most people have not been where I have been, Mirela said with a slight smile. Most people have not died and been reborn, have not spent 5 years building a life from nothing, with no memory of what came before. When you have already experienced the impossible, everything else seems manageable by comparison. That evening, as the sun set and the nearly full moon rose in the east, Dracula led Mirela to the tower. It was a long climb up spiral staircases so old the stone steps were worn smooth in the center. The walls were thick and cold, and their footsteps echoed in the confined space. But when they finally emerged at the top, Mirela gasped at the sight that greeted them. The tower room was circular, with large arched windows on all sides, offering views of the surrounding mountains. The floor was inlaid with symbols in silver and stone, ancient runes and geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. In the center of the room stood a simple stone altar, and above it, through an opening in the roof, the moon shone down with brilliant clarity. This is the heart of the castle, Dracula said, the place where the original magic was worked, where the curse that made me what I am was first invoked. It is a place of power but also of danger. What we do here will have consequences beyond what we can fully anticipate. I understand, Mirela said, and I am ready. Dracula moved to the altar and began laying out items he had brought with him. Candles made from beeswax and inscribed with runes, a silver chalice filled with wine mixed with herbs, a blade of obsidian, black as midnight and sharp as sorrow, and a length of white silk which he used to drape the altar. The ritual is simple in form but profound in meaning, he explained as he worked. I will drink from you, but not as a vampire feeds in hunger. Instead, it will be a communion, a willing sharing of essence. Your blood will carry your memories, your emotions, your very self to me. And through the connection, I will share with you my memories of Elena, everything I remember of who she was and who we were together. And this will help me remember, Mirela asked. It should, Dracula said. The mind is a strange thing, and memory stranger still. Sometimes we need a catalyst, a key to unlock what has been hidden. My memories of Elena may serve as that key, showing you yourself as you once were, and helping you reclaim what has been lost. Then let us begin, Mirela said, moving to stand before the altar. Dracula took her hands and looked into her eyes. Are you certain? Once we start, once the blood is shared, there is no turning back. You will be changed by this, as will I am certain, Mirela said. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Do it. Dracula nodded and released her hands. He lit the candles one by one, speaking words in that ancient tongue Mirela had read, but not spoken. As each candle caught flame, the runes on the floor began to glow more brightly, pulsing in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. The air in the tower grew thick with power, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. Kneel, Dracula said gently, and Mirela lowered herself to her knees before the altar. He knelt facing her, the altar between them, and took up the obsidian blade. This will hurt, he warned, but only for a moment. I am not afraid of pain, Mirela said. Do what must be done. Dracula took her hand and turned it palm up. With one swift, precise motion, he drew the blade across her palm, opening a cut that immediately welled with blood. Mirela gasped but did not pull away. He held her hand over the chalice, letting her blood drip into the wine, the red drops spreading and swirling through the liquid like smoke. When enough blood had been collected, Dracula set down the blade and tore a strip from the white silk. binding her hand to staunch the bleeding. Then he raised the chalice and spoke words that resonated with power, words that seemed to echo not just in the tower, but in the very fabric of reality itself. By blood given freely, by will unbroken, by love that transcends death itself, I call upon the ancient powers that govern life and memory. Let this communion serve as a bridge between past and present, between what was and what is. Let truth be revealed and memory restored. Let the bond between these souls be strengthened and made manifest. He drank from the chalice, and Mirela watched as his eyes changed, the pupils dilating until they were nearly black, filled with visions only he could see. He lowered the chalice and extended it to her. "Drink," he said, his voice rough with the power moving through him. "Complete the circuit. Make the bond real." Mirela took the chalice in her uninjured hand and raised it to her lips. The liquid was warm and tasted of copper and wine and something else, something wild and ancient and utterly inhuman. She drank deeply, feeling the mixture slide down her throat like liquid fire, spreading through her body in waves of heat and power. And then the visions came. She saw Elena, young and bright and full of hope, walking up the mountain road to the castle for the first time. She felt Elena's fear and courage mingling as she approached the massive doors. She experienced Elena's wonder when Dracula first invited her inside, first showed her kindness, first made her laugh with his dry wit and unexpected gentleness. She saw their courtship through Dracula's eyes, every moment etched in his memory with perfect clarity. The first time they had held hands, the first time Elena had kissed him, standing on her toes to reach his lips, fearless and determined. The night he had confessed what he was, expecting her to flee in horror, and instead she had simply nodded and said she had already guessed, that it changed nothing about how she felt. She saw the garden they had created together, Elena directing and planting while Dracula moved earth and stone with supernatural strength. She saw the hours spent in the library, Elena curled in a chair reading while Dracula worked at his desk, both content in companionable silence. She saw the dance in the moonlight, the laughter, the tears, the thousand small moments that made up a love story too beautiful to be contained in a single lifetime. And then she saw the fever. Dracula's perspective on those terrible days was agonizing to experience. His helplessness as Elena grew weaker, his desperation as he brought doctor after doctor, only to watch them shake their heads and retreat. His torment as she lay dying, begging him to let her go, making him promise to wait for her return. She saw Elena's final moments through his eyes and felt his grief like a physical blow. She felt the 300 years of waiting, compressed into a cascade of images, the seasons changing, the castle aging, the world transforming around him while he remained frozen in that moment of loss, unable to move forward, unable to let go. And then finally, she saw herself. Mirela, standing at his door in the rain, smiling. The shock of recognition he had felt, the hope and fear warring within him. Every moment they had shared since that night, seen through his eyes, felt through his heart. The visions faded, and Mirela found herself back in the tower room, kneeling across from Dracula, tears streaming down both their faces. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of recognition, of reunion, of love acknowledged and reclaimed. "I remember," Mirela whispered. "I remember everything. I am Elena. I was Elena. I have returned just as I promised." "Yes," Dracula said, his voice breaking. "You have returned. After 300 years of waiting, you have finally come home." They moved around the altar and embraced, holding each other as if they could merge their very beings through will alone. The bond between them was complete now, sealed by blood and magic and love that had proven stronger than death itself. They could feel each other's emotions, sense each other's thoughts, know each other with a completeness that transcended normal human understanding. Outside the tower, the nearly full moon continued its journey across the sky, bearing witness to a miracle. Inside, two souls reunited after 3 centuries of separation, held each other and wept and laughed and celebrated the impossible gift they had been given. The girl who had loved a monster had returned. The monster who had waited faithfully had been vindicated. And together they stood on the threshold of a future neither could have imagined but both desperately wanted. But even in that moment of triumph, both of them knew that their trials were not over. Victor and his hunters would return in 2 days. The full moon ritual still awaited them, a ceremony that might grant Dracula his mortality, but would require a sacrifice they had not yet discussed. And somewhere in the darkness, forces neither of them fully understood were watching, waiting, preparing to test the strength of their restored bond. The 4th chapter was ending, but the story itself was reaching its climax. Everything that had come before was merely prologue. What came next would determine the fate of 2 souls who had loved across the boundaries of life and death, who had found each other against impossible odds, who stood together against a world that would not easily accept what they represented. The moon would be full tomorrow night. The ritual would be performed. The truth would be complete. And then, whatever came after, they would face it together, as they had always been meant to do. The night of preparation had ended. The dawn of transformation was about to begin. The day of the full moon dawned grey and heavy with the promise of storm. Mirela, who now remembered being Elena, who carried within her the memories of 2 lifetimes separated by 3 centuries of void, stood at the window of what had once been her chambers and watched clouds gather over the mountains. She felt different now, more complete, as if pieces of herself that had been missing had finally clicked into place. But with that completion came a weight of understanding, a knowledge of what must come next. Dracula found her there as the morning light struggled through the clouds. He looked tired, she noticed, the blood ritual having taken more from him than he had admitted. But his eyes were bright with something that might have been hope, or might have been fear. It was difficult to tell which. "You did not sleep," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "I could not," Mirela said. "My mind is too full. 2 lifetimes of memories competing for attention, trying to arrange themselves into some coherent narrative." She turned to him with a slight smile. "It is strange, knowing that I have lived before, that I loved you then and died in your arms and somehow found my way back. Do you regret it?" Dracula asked quietly. "Knowing the truth, sometimes ignorance is easier to bear than knowledge." "No," Mirela said firmly. "I do not regret it. I would rather know, even if the knowing brings pain." She reached out and took his hand, feeling the now familiar thrill of connection that came from the blood bond. "But I have been thinking about what comes next. About the ritual tonight." "As have I," Dracula admitted. "The grimoires are very clear about what is required. A willing sacrifice of blood and life force, freely given by one who loves unconditionally. The ritual must be performed under the full moon, in a place of power, with the proper words spoken and the proper symbols drawn. If done correctly, the curse of vampirism can be broken, and the cursed one can be restored to mortality." "And the sacrifice?" Mirela asked. "What happens to the person who gives their life force?" Dracula was quiet for a long moment. "The texts are not entirely clear," he said finally. "Some suggest the sacrifice is fatal, that the giver dies so that the cursed one might live. Others suggest it is more of a sharing, a permanent bond that sustains both, but changes both in fundamental ways. There is no way to know for certain until the ritual is complete." "I see," Mirela said. "And if the sacrifice is fatal, if I must die so that you can become mortal again?" "Then we will not perform the ritual," Dracula said immediately. "I will not lose you again, Elena. Not after waiting 300 years for your return. Not after finally having you back. I would rather remain cursed for another 3 centuries than risk losing you." "Even if it means Victor and his hunters will destroy you tomorrow?" Mirela asked. "Even if it means spending eternity as a monster, unable to walk in sunlight, unable to live a normal life?" "Even then," Dracula said, "you are more important than any of that. You have always been more important." Mirela turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I did not return from death itself just to watch you destroyed by hunters or condemned to eternal darkness. I returned because we have unfinished business, because our love story is not yet complete. And if the ritual requires my sacrifice, then that is a sacrifice I am willing to make." "No," Dracula said, his voice sharp with fear. "I will not allow it. It is not your choice to allow or forbid," Mirela said. It is my choice, my life, my decision, just as it was my choice to die as a mortal 300 years ago rather than become a vampire. You honored that choice then. You must honor my choice now. This is different, Dracula protested. Then you were dying anyway, and I could do nothing to prevent it. Now you are healthy and alive, and I am being asked to participate in your destruction. How can you expect me to do that? Because you love me, Mirela said simply. Because love sometimes means letting go. Because the greatest act of love is not holding on, but releasing what we most treasure for their own good. She cupped his face in her hands, making him look at her. 300 years ago, you let me die rather than damn me to immortality. Now I am asking you to let me live, truly live, by freeing you from the curse that has held you prisoner all this time. What if the ritual fails? Dracula asked, his voice breaking. What if I lose you and remain cursed anyway? What if we sacrifice everything and gain nothing? Then at least we will have tried, Mirela said. At least we will know we did everything we could. But I do not believe it will fail. I have faith that love is stronger than any curse, stronger than death itself. I have already proven that by returning to you. Now let me prove it again by giving you the freedom you have sought for centuries. They stood together in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Outside, the clouds continued to gather, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming, both literal and metaphorical, and there was no way to avoid it. They could only face it with courage and hope that love would be enough. I am afraid, Dracula admitted finally. I am more afraid now than I have been in 300 years, because now I have something to lose again. Now I have hope, and hope is the most terrifying thing of all. I know, Mirela said, pulling him close. I am afraid too. But we face this fear together. Whatever happens tonight, whatever the ritual demands or grants, we face it as one. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the ritual. Dracula gathered the necessary components, herbs and oils and crystals charged with lunar energy. He drew the symbols on the floor of the tower room, complex geometric patterns that had to be exactly right for the magic to work. He prepared the incantations, practicing the pronunciation of words in languages long dead, making sure every syllable was perfect. Mirela prepared herself spiritually, meditating in the garden where Elena had once tended flowers. She thought about both her lives, the simple peasant girl who had loved a monster, and the modern woman who had found her way back across centuries. She thought about love and sacrifice, about what it meant to give everything for another person. And she thought about the future, the life she and Dracula might have if the ritual succeeded, the possibility of growing old together, of experiencing the fullness of mortal existence side by side. As the sun set and the full moon began to rise, they met at the base of the tower. Mirela wore a simple white dress, similar to the one Elena had worn in her final days. Dracula wore the formal attire of a nobleman, black and elegant, his dark hair pulled back from his pale face. They looked at each other for a long moment, communicating without words everything they felt, everything they feared, everything they hoped. "Are you ready?" Dracula asked. "I am ready," Mirela confirmed. "Let us finish what we started 300 years ago." They climbed the tower together, hand in hand, their footsteps echoing in the spiral staircase. When they reached the top, the full moon was just clearing the eastern mountains, huge and bright and perfect. Its light streamed through the opening in the roof, illuminating the symbols Dracula had drawn, making them seem to pulse with otherworldly energy. "The ritual must begin at moonrise and end at midnight," Dracula explained as they entered the circle of symbols. 3 hours to complete the transformation. 3 hours during which we will be vulnerable to any interruption. If Victor and his hunters arrive during the ritual, we will be defenseless. Then we must trust that they will honor the agreement, Mirela said. We must trust that they will wait until after midnight to make their judgment. And if they do not? Dracula asked. Then we face whatever comes, Mirela said. Together, as we always have. Dracula nodded and began the ritual. He lit candles at the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, each flame representing an element. Earth, air, fire, water. He poured a circle of salt around the altar, creating a boundary between the mundane world and the sacred space they were about to enter. And then he began to chant, his voice rising and falling in rhythms that seemed to resonate with the very foundations of the castle. Mirela felt the power building, felt reality growing thin and permeable around them. The moonlight grew brighter, more concentrated, until it seemed to be a solid thing, a column of pure silver light connecting heaven and earth. The symbols on the floor began to glow, not with reflected light, but with their own luminescence, pulsing in time with Dracula's chanting. He took the obsidian blade and made a cut on his own palm, then on hers, the same hand she had cut the night before. Their blood mingled as they clasped hands over the altar, red drops falling onto the white silk, spreading and forming patterns that echoed the symbols on the floor. "By blood and moon and ancient power," Dracula intoned, his voice carrying a resonance that was not entirely his own, as if he were speaking for forces greater than himself. "By love that transcends death and time, by sacrifice freely given and grace freely accepted, I call upon the primal forces that govern life and death, curse and blessing, darkness and light." He paused, and Mirela felt a question in the air, a presence asking if they were certain, if they understood what they were beginning. She squeezed Dracula's hand and spoke clearly. "I offer myself freely," she said, "my blood, my life force, my very essence. I give all that I am so that the one I love might be freed from the curse that binds him. Let my mortality become his. Let my humanity restore what was lost. Let my sacrifice be the key that breaks the chains of darkness." The moonlight intensified, becoming almost blinding. Mirela felt energy pouring through her, not painfully but overwhelmingly, as if she were a conduit for something vast and incomprehensible. She felt her life force flowing out through her hand, where it clasped Dracula's, felt it entering him, filling the empty spaces where his humanity had once dwelt. And she felt something flowing back, something dark and cold and ancient, the curse leaving him, seeking a new vessel and finding her willing to accept it. For a terrifying moment, she understood what it meant to be a vampire, to feel the hunger and the loneliness and the terrible weight of immortality. She understood why Dracula had suffered for 300 years, why he had sought so desperately to be free. But then the flow reversed, and the darkness that had tried to enter her was caught by the moonlight, trapped in the space between them, and slowly, inexorably dissolved. The curse was not passing to her. It was being destroyed, burned away by the power of willing sacrifice and unconditional love. Dracula cried out, a sound of pain and release intermingled as the curse broke. Mirela felt the moment it happened, felt the fundamental change in him as mortality flooded back into his being. His hand in hers grew warmer. His heart, which had been still for centuries, began to beat, slowly at first and then faster, finding its rhythm. His skin flushed with color. His eyes, which had been the cold silver of a predator, warmed to a human gray. The ritual was working. The curse was breaking. Love was proving stronger than darkness, but the ritual was not yet complete. The energy continued to flow between them, reshaping them both, forging a bond that went beyond the blood connection they had already shared. Mirela felt herself changing too, felt strength entering her that she had not possessed before, resilience and power, and a deep connection to the forces that governed life itself. She was not becoming a vampire, but she was not entirely human anymore either. She was something new, something unprecedented. The 3 hours passed in what seemed like both an instant and an eternity. Dracula and Mirela stood locked in the ritual, bound by clasped hands and flowing energy, while the moon climbed higher in the sky, and the storm that had been threatening finally broke. Rain lashed the tower, lightning split the sky, thunder shook the ancient stones. But inside the circle of protection, within the column of moonlight, they were untouched. As midnight approached, as the ritual neared its completion, Mirela felt herself growing weak. The sacrifice was taking its toll, draining her in ways she had not anticipated. She had been prepared to die, had accepted that possibility when she agreed to the ritual. But now, as her strength faded and her vision began to dim, she felt a sudden surge of regret. Not regret for the choice she had made, but regret that she would not get to see Dracula live as a mortal man, would not get to share that life with him. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I wanted more time with you." "You will have it," Dracula said, and his voice was strong, alive with a vitality it had not held before. "I will not let you go. Not again. Not ever." He pulled her closer, and she felt his arms around her, supporting her as her knees buckled. And then she felt something else, something unexpected. His blood, mortal blood now, warm and rich and untainted by curse, flowing into her through the cut on her hand. He was reversing the flow, giving back what she had given, sustaining her with his own life force. "What are you doing?" Mirela gasped. "Completing the ritual," Dracula said. "The grimoire spoke of sacrifice, but it also spoke of union, of two becoming one. You gave me your mortality, your humanity. Now I give you my strength, my will to survive. We will be bound together, neither entirely mortal nor entirely other, but something new, something whole." The energy shifted, finding a new balance, a new equilibrium. The flow between them became circular rather than linear, each sustaining the other, each completing what the other lacked. And as midnight struck, as the tower bells told the changing of the day, the ritual reached its culmination. The moonlight flared one final time, so bright that Mirela had to close her eyes against it. She felt the last vestiges of Dracula's curse burn away, felt her own humanity expand to encompass something greater. And then the light faded, the energy dissipated, and they collapsed together onto the floor of the tower, exhausted but alive, changed but whole. For long moments they simply lay there, breathing, feeling their hearts beat in synchrony. The storm continued outside, but it sounded distant now, muted. The tower room was quiet except for the sound of rain and their mingled breathing. "Did it work?" Mirela finally asked. "Are you free?" Dracula raised his hand before his face, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time. In the moonlight that now seemed gentle rather than fierce, she could see that his skin had changed, had taken on the warmth and color of living flesh. He pressed his fingers to his neck, feeling for a pulse, and his eyes widened. "My heart is beating," he said wonderingly. "I can feel it. I am mortal. After 300 years, I am mortal again." "And I am alive," Mirela said, sitting up with an effort. "I feel different, changed somehow. But I am alive. The sacrifice did not kill me, because I would not let it," Dracula said, sitting up beside her and taking her hands. "Because love is not about one person giving up everything for another. It is about both people lifting each other up, sustaining each other, becoming together something greater than either could be alone." They helped each other to their feet, both unsteady from the ordeal, but growing stronger with each moment. Through the opening in the roof they could see the moon continuing its journey across the sky, now just a moon, beautiful but no longer charged with supernatural power. The ritual was complete, the curse was broken, the impossible had been achieved, but their trial was not yet over. As they stood together in the tower, catching their breath and marveling at what they had accomplished, they heard sounds from below, voices, footsteps, the clang of weapons and the murmur of prayers. Victor and his hunters had arrived. They made their way down from the tower slowly, both still weak from the ritual. As they descended the spiral staircase, they could hear the hunters spreading through the castle, searching for them. Mirela felt a moment of fear, wondering if they would be able to explain what had happened, if Victor would believe that the curse was truly broken. But Dracula squeezed her hand and said, "We will face them together. We will show them the truth. And if they cannot accept it, if they still choose violence, then at least we will face it as we faced everything else, with courage and love." They emerged into the main hall to find Victor and a dozen hunters waiting, weapons drawn, crosses held high. But when Victor saw them, when he looked at Dracula's face, his expression changed from righteous anger to confusion. "You," Victor said, taking a step forward. "You look different. You look almost human." "I am human," Dracula said quietly. "The curse is broken. The ritual was successful. I am mortal again, as I was before I was turned." "Impossible," one of the hunters muttered. "Once cursed, always cursed. It cannot be undone." "And yet it has been," Mirela said, stepping forward. "I performed the ritual of sacrifice, giving my life force freely to break the chains that bound him, and he in turn saved me from death by sharing his restored mortality. We are bound together now, neither one thing nor another, but something new." Victor approached cautiously, studying Dracula's face with intense scrutiny. After a long moment, he raised a silver cross and pressed it against Dracula's chest. In the old days, such contact would have burned, would have caused agony and charred flesh. But now nothing happened. Dracula did not flinch, did not pull away. The cross touched him and nothing occurred, because there was nothing unholy left in him to react. Victor stepped back, lowering the cross, his expression stunned. "It is true," he said. "The curse is broken. You are mortal." "I am," Dracula confirmed, "and I am prepared to face whatever judgment you deem appropriate for the crimes I committed when I was cursed. I will not resist. I will not fight. If my death is required for justice to be served, then I accept that fate." "No," Mirela said firmly, moving to stand beside him. "If you kill him, you will have to kill me as well. We are bound now, our lives intertwined. His death would be my death." The hunters murmured among themselves, uncertain. This was not what they had come for. They had expected a battle, a righteous destruction of a monster. What they had found instead was a man and a woman, clearly in love, having performed a miracle that should not have been possible. Victor looked at them both for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Lower your weapons," he commanded. "This is not what we thought it was." "But father," one of the hunters protested, "he is still the creature who killed your ancestor. He still deserves punishment." "Does he?" Victor asked. "If he is no longer that creature, if he has been fundamentally transformed, can we hold him accountable for actions taken when he was something else entirely? Is a man responsible for what he did when he was possessed by a demon after the demon has been exorcised?" The question hung in the air, and Mirela could see the hunters struggling with it. These were men who had lived their entire lives with clear moral categories, with absolute certainty about right and wrong. What Dracula represented challenged all of that, forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth that the world was more complex than their faith had taught them. "I cannot speak for my ancestor," Victor said finally. "I cannot say whether she would want vengeance or mercy, but I can speak for myself." He looked at Dracula with an expression that was equal parts wonder and sorrow. "You have broken a curse that should not have been breakable. You have transformed yourself through love and sacrifice, and you have shown me that perhaps God's mercy is greater and more mysterious than I had believed." He paused, then said, "I will not kill you, I will not harm you, but neither will I bless what you have done or call it good. You have lived for 300 years as a monster, and while you may be mortal now, that does not erase your past. It does not bring back those you killed or undo the suffering you caused." "I know," Dracula said quietly. "I do not expect forgiveness, I do not deserve it. I carry the weight of my crimes and will carry them until the day I truly die. But I am grateful for the chance to live whatever time remains to me as a man rather than a monster. And I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will spend that time trying to do good, trying to make amends in whatever small ways I can." Victor nodded slowly. "Then go," he said. "Leave this castle. Leave these mountains. Go and live your mortal life somewhere else, far from those who remember what you were, and pray that God has more mercy for you than I do." "Thank you," Mirela said, taking Dracula's hand. "Your mercy will not be forgotten or wasted." The hunters parted, creating a path to the door. Dracula and Mirela walked through them, heads high, moving together toward the exit. As they passed Victor, the priest reached out and touched Dracula's shoulder, stopping him. "I will pray for you," Victor said quietly. "I do not fully understand what has happened here, but I will pray that you find peace, and that the souls of those you destroyed find justice in the next life." "Thank you," Dracula said. "I hope for the same." They left the castle as dawn was breaking, the first rays of sunlight touching the mountain peaks. For the first time in 300 years, Dracula could walk in daylight without fear or pain. He stopped just outside the gates and turned his face to the rising sun, tears streaming down his cheeks as he felt its warmth on his skin. "I had forgotten," he whispered. "I had forgotten how beautiful the sun could be." Mirela stood beside him, holding his hand, sharing his joy. They had survived. They had succeeded. They had broken a curse that should have been unbreakable and emerged on the other side, transformed, but together. "Where will we go?" she asked. "What will we do?" "I do not know," Dracula admitted. "For 300 years I had only one purpose, to wait for your return. Now that you are here, now that the waiting is over, I do not know what comes next." "Life comes next," Mirela said simply. "Real life, mortal life, with all its joys and sorrows and uncertainties. We will grow old together. We will experience the fullness of human existence. We will love each other not for centuries but for decades, and that love will be all the more precious for being finite." "Yes," Dracula said, smiling through his tears. "Yes, that sounds perfect." They walked down the mountain together as the sun climbed higher in the sky, leaving Castle Dracula behind. The ancient fortress would stand empty now, slowly crumbling, becoming a ruin haunted only by memories. But those memories were no longer chains holding Dracula prisoner. They were simply history, lessons learned, scars that had healed into wisdom. Behind them, the hunters watched them go. Victor stood at the castle gate, his expression troubled but thoughtful. One of his men approached him. "Should we follow them?" the hunter asked. "Make sure they truly leave." "No," Victor said. "Let them go. What happened here tonight was beyond my understanding, perhaps beyond any understanding, but I do not think we have anything more to fear from them." He turned back to look at the castle one final time, then made the sign of the cross. "May God have mercy on them both," he said, "and on all of us who witnessed this miracle." The hunters departed, returning to their village with a story they would struggle to explain, a tale of curse and redemption that challenged everything they thought they knew about evil and salvation. Some would dismiss it as madness, as a shared delusion. Others would ponder it for the rest of their lives, wondering if they had truly witnessed divine grace in action. But for Dracula and Mirela, the story was not over. It was, in fact, only beginning. They traveled west, away from the Carpathian Mountains, seeking a place where they could start fresh, where no one knew their history or cared about their past. They found a small village in the foothills, a quiet place where they could live simply and peacefully. Dracula took the name André, a common name that would not draw attention. Mirela kept her name, for it was the name she had built her new life around, and she saw no reason to change it. They told people they were married, which was true in every way that mattered, even if no priest had blessed the union. They built a small house with a garden, and Mirela planted flowers there, white roses and lavender, just as Elena had done 300 years before. Dracula, now mortal, discovered the joys and challenges of human existence. He felt hunger and thirst, fatigue and illness. He experienced the changing of seasons, not as an eternal observer, but as a participant, feeling summer's heat and winter's cold in ways he had forgotten. He grew older, slowly but noticeably, lines appearing on his face, grey threading through his dark hair. And he cherished every moment of it, every sign of mortality, every reminder that he was human again. Mirela, changed by the ritual but still fundamentally mortal, experienced her own transformation. She found that she was stronger than normal humans, more resilient, with a deeper connection to the natural world. She could sense things others could not, feel the flow of energy through living things, understand the language of growing plants and wild animals. She was not immortal, but neither would she age at the normal rate. The ritual had granted her perhaps a century of life, maybe more, time enough to grow old with Dracula, to share a full and complete mortal existence. They lived quietly for years, becoming part of the village community. Dracula, with his vast knowledge and experience, became a teacher, sharing his understanding of history and literature with the village children. Mirela continued her work as an educator, helping girls learn to read and write, expanding their horizons beyond the narrow confines of rural life. They were respected, even loved, known for their kindness and wisdom. But they never forgot what they had been, what they had survived. On full moon nights, they would stand together in their garden and remember the ritual, the sacrifice, the moment when curse became blessing. They would hold hands and feel the bond between them, the connection forged in blood and magic, and love that transcended everything. Sometimes visitors would come from far away, having heard rumors of the man who had broken an ancient curse. Some were skeptics, wanting to expose them as frauds. Others were believers, seeking hope that their own curses might be broken. Dracula and Mirela received them all with grace, neither confirming nor denying the stories, simply living their lives as testimony to the power of love and sacrifice. Years passed, 10, 20, 30. Dracula's hair went completely grey, then white. His face became lined with age, but his eyes remained bright with vitality and joy. Mirela aged more slowly, but she aged nonetheless, her beauty deepening rather than fading, becoming something richer and more profound. They grew old together, as they had always dreamed, experiencing the full arc of human existence. On their 50th anniversary of leaving the castle, they returned to the mountains one final time. The journey was difficult for Dracula now, his mortal body showing its age, but he insisted on making the pilgrimage. They climbed the familiar road to Castle Dracula, now even more ruined than when they had left it, and stood together in the overgrown garden. "Do you have any regrets?" Mirela asked as they looked at the wildflowers that had taken over what had once been carefully tended beds. "Not one," Dracula said, taking her hand. "If I could go back and make different choices, I would not. Every moment of suffering, every year of loneliness, every hour of waiting, it was all worth it because it led me to you, and more importantly, it taught me what I needed to learn, that love is not about possession or immortality. It is about presence, about showing up, about choosing to care even when caring hurts." "I feel the same," Mirela said. "The 5 years of amnesia, the uncertainty, the fear of not knowing who I was, it was all preparation for finding you again, for completing this journey." They stood in silence for a while, remembering. Then Dracula spoke again. "There is something I never told you," he said. "Something I discovered in the grimoires after the ritual was complete." "What?" Mirela asked. "The ritual that broke my curse, it did not just free me from vampirism, it also freed my soul from the damnation that came with it. When I die, truly die, my soul will not be condemned to hell. It will be free to move on, to find whatever comes next." She paused. "Because of your sacrifice, because of your love, you saved me in every way it is possible to be saved." Mirela felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then it was worth it," she said. "Every moment, every sacrifice, every fear, it was all worth it." They left the castle for the last time as the sun set, walking hand in hand down the mountain. They would not return again. Their story with that place was complete, the circle closed, the promise fulfilled. 20 more years passed. Dracula grew frailer, his body slowly failing as mortal bodies must. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Mirela never dimmed. On a spring morning, with the garden in full bloom and sunlight streaming through the window, he took his last breath. Mirela held him as he died, just as he had held her 300 years before, and she whispered the same words she had whispered then. "I will wait for you. I will find you again. This is not the end." And Dracula, with his final breath, smiled and said, "I know. I believe you. I will see you again, my love." He died peacefully, a mortal death, clean and natural and right. Mirela buried him in the garden they had created together, under the white roses and the lavender. She mourned him, as she had mourned him before, but this time the mourning was different. This time there was peace in it, completion. They had lived a full life together. They had experienced all that human existence offered, and now, for a little while, they would be separated again. But it was a separation with an end point, a temporary parting before an eternal reunion. Mirela lived another 20 years after Dracula's death, aging slowly but inevitably. She continued teaching, continued tending the garden, continued being a source of wisdom and kindness in the village. And when her own time came, when she felt death approaching, she was not afraid. She lay down in the garden, surrounded by flowers, and closed her eyes with a smile on her face. "I am coming," she whispered. "Wait for me just a little longer." And somewhere beyond the veil of mortality, Dracula waited, just as he had waited before, knowing that this time the waiting would not be 300 years. This time it would be merely a moment, a heartbeat, a breath. And then she would be there, and they would be together again, no longer bound by curse or mortality, no longer separated by death or time. Two souls who had loved across impossible distances, who had broken curses and defied death, who had proven that love truly could transcend every boundary. Their story, which had begun in darkness and fear, ended in light and peace and the absolute certainty that some bonds are eternal, some promises are always kept, some loves are literally deathless. The garden remained, tended by villagers who remembered the strange, wonderful couple who had lived there. The white roses and lavender continued to bloom year after year, as if sustained by something beyond mere soil and water. And sometimes, on full moon nights, people would swear they saw two figures walking hand in hand among the flowers, laughing and talking, utterly at peace. Perhaps they were ghosts. Perhaps they were merely tricks of moonlight and memory. Or perhaps they were something else, something more wonderful. Two souls finally reunited, sharing eternity together, no longer waiting, no longer separated, but complete and whole and home. The story of Count Dracula and Elena, who became Mirela and returned to him across 3 centuries, ends not in tragedy but in triumph. Not in damnation but in redemption, not in darkness but in light. It ends as all the truest love stories must, with the promise that love does not die, that faith is rewarded, that patient waiting is never in vain. It ends with hope, with grace, with the certain knowledge that some promises are kept, some loves endure, some souls are meant to be together no matter what obstacles the universe places in their path. And in a small garden somewhere in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains, flowers bloom eternal, bearing witness to a love that conquered death itself, a love that proved stronger than any curse, a love that waited 3 centuries and finally, wonderfully, miraculously came home.